Chapter 41. At 10:30 a.m. on a weekend, Atticus Blaine stood in front of Professor Lockhart's office. To be honest, he didn't harbor much dislike for this not-so-famous professor. From their brief interaction last time, the professor's demeanor had been quite friendly. Of course, it must be said that his speaking style was indeed a bit exaggerated. In fact, Atticus felt a little guilty towards Lockhart, and there were two reasons for this. The first was obvious. As a professor of defense against the dark arts, Atticus had taken over half of Lockhart's responsibilities without any prior notice. To put it more bluntly, this kind of behavior could be considered job-grabbing, which was quite unethical. The second reason was a bit more complicated. A few nights ago, Atticus had used a certain method to transfer the curse of the Dark Lord, associated with this position, onto a voodoo doll. This reduced the risk for himself and, consequently, for Lockhart, who would have otherwise borne the brunt of the curse. At first glance, this might seem like a win-win situation, but it wasn't. The curse of the Dark Lord was like a rushing river. Atticus's method of resisting it was akin to building a dam to block the torrent. As long as the dam held strong, he was safe. However, if the dam ever collapsed, or if he chose to dismantle it, the resulting flood would be far more devastating than before. Of course, if Professor Lockhart resigned and fled before Atticus, he would have to face all the consequences. "Please come in." The voice behind the door was as cheerful as ever, with no hint of anything amiss. "Hope he's not too mad," Atticus muttered softly before pushing open the door. The decor of Professor Lockhart's office was as flamboyant as the man himself. The walls were adorned with his portraits, and despite the sunny morning, numerous bright candles burned throughout the room. The light reflecting off the photo of White Fang on the wall nearly blinded Atticus. Another noteworthy point was that, among the Hogwarts staff, probably only Professor Lockhart received as much mail as Headmaster Dumbledore. The letters awaiting his reply piled about 5 feet high on his desk. "Oh, Miss Granger, I didn't expect you to be here." Atticus wasn't alone in Lockhart's office. Across from him, a young witch quickly stood up from her chair upon his entrance, hurriedly tucking a golden card into her pocket, her face flushed. "Good morning, Mr. Blaine." Atticus stood at the door, unmoving. He raised an eyebrow and smiled. "So, Madame Pomfrey has taken care of your beautiful black eye." Atticus noticed the young witch lower her head, blinking rapidly, her body almost curling up in nervousness. He immediately understood. "Oh well, congratulations on your recovery, Miss Granger," he said, then turned to Lockhart with a questioning look. "I'm sorry to interrupt your conversation, Professor Lockhart. If it's not convenient for you now—" "Oh, don't leave. I can't turn down a fan just because of another fan, Atticus. Miss Granger is here to thank me, and we're done talking." Atticus saw Hermione looking at him with curiosity in her eyes, realizing she must have misunderstood something. He didn't bother to correct this harmless misunderstanding and walked in with a wry smile. Although curious about why Mr. Blaine had come to visit Professor Lockhart, Hermione knew they wouldn't allow her to stay and eavesdrop, so she reluctantly left. In a small mishap, as Hermione was deep in thought, she accidentally knocked over the stack of hundreds of letters waiting for a reply on Professor Lockhart's desk. "I'm sorry, Professor. I'll help you now," she said, quickly moving to assist. Hermione was frantically searching for her wand, and Atticus Blaine shook his head in amusement. Every time he saw this clever little witch, she seemed to be in a state of panic. "No need to worry, Miss Granger. I'll handle it," he assured her. As the breathless Hermione hurried away, Atticus moved forward with a smile. He glanced at the envelopes scattered across the floor and suddenly he noticed a stack of old-looking parchment beneath the letters. The words on the paper caught his attention, causing his eyes to momentarily freeze, but he quickly regained his composure. With a crisp snap of his fingers, hundreds of letters in various envelopes floated up and neatly returned to their places. "In my opinion, you are probably the most popular teacher in this school at the moment, Professor Lockhart," Atticus remarked. Professor Lockhart, initially taken aback by Atticus's impressive silent and wandless spellcasting, quickly beamed with pride. "In fact, it's more than that. Once you fully integrate into the team of professors, you'll find that Gilderoy Lockhart is also the one who garners the most attention among the faculty. After all, Lockhart winked playfully at Atticus and took a deep breath. How many people can claim to have won the Witch Weekly Award for the most charming smile 5 times in a row and are also recipients of the Order of Merlin and honorary members of the Anti-Dark Arts League? Of course, Atticus, you and Miss Granger must know my past like the back of your hand. Lockhart, oblivious to Atticus's growing discomfort, continued to bask in his own glory. Oh, Atticus, I must admit, you've surprised me once again. You've worked hard to follow in my footsteps to Hogwarts, and now you're even speaking with Dumbledore to apply as my assistant. I must say, Atticus, you stand out among my most devoted followers. Atticus's lips were tightly pursed, his expression tense. He began to understand why this famous star writer was so disliked at Hogwarts. However, this also gave Atticus insight into how to communicate with him. Ahem, that's true, Professor Lockhart. I am indeed your admirer. Aha! Lockhart laughed exaggeratedly, his face lighting up with delight. It is true. I applied to be an assistant professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts to get close to you. I hope to improve myself in your class alongside the young wizards. However, Professor McGonagall seems to think that dealing with so many fan letters every day while teaching hundreds of young wizards to combat the dark arts is too much for you. She wants me to help alleviate your burden by teaching the senior students alone. To be honest, that wasn't my original intention. Needless to say, Atticus, I know exactly what you mean, Lockhart interrupted, his confidence practically radiating. You want to teach with me, right? No problem, Atticus. Gilderoy Lockhart never turns down a request from a fan. The goal was achieved so easily that Atticus was momentarily at a loss. At the end of their pleasant meeting, Atticus inquired if he needed to make any preparations to keep up with Professor Lockhart's class. Lockhart assured him that no preparations were necessary. He just needed to follow the directions in class. By the way, Professor Lockhart, Atticus said, pausing at the door with a delicate expression, have you studied memory magic? P.S. Please remember to vote for investment. End of this chapter. Chapter 42. Many Expectations. As everyone knows, at Hogwarts, if a secret is known by more than one student or professor, it spreads like wildfire. Depending on how sensational the news is, it can reach even Hagrid within 1 to 3 days. A dog named Fang seems to know it all. That evening, Harry, who hadn't dismounted his broomstick all day except for brief bathroom breaks, subsisting on a few beef pies Ron had brought him for lunch, heard the surprising news. Atticus Blaine is going to be our Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Is it true, Ron? In the common room, nearly everyone was buzzing about it. Harry, limping slightly, hurried past several cheering upperclassmen and made his way to the sofa where they often gathered for discussions. Besides Ron and Neville, even Seamus and Dean were there. Just an assistant professor, Harry, Ron clarified, squeezing in next to Neville to make room for the exhausted Harry. The news first came from Hufflepuff. I thought it was a joke at first, but on my way back from delivering your food, I overheard Ravenclaw's blocker discussing it with Dupin in the hall. It said that Malfoy has already confirmed it with Snape. Ron frowned, still in disbelief. Honestly, I don't understand how this happened. But that's a good thing, isn't it? Neville ventured cautiously. When everyone turned to look at him, he shrank back slightly, his tone becoming hesitant. I mean, he's an investigator. He should know more about dealing with dark magic than Lockhart. Harry and Ron exchanged glances, but didn't respond. It was hard to judge Blaine's teaching abilities since they hadn't seen him in action, but in terms of dueling, based on Lockhart's performance in last year's dueling class, Lockhart's sycophantic skills couldn't possibly match Blaine's prowess. At that moment, the Weasley twins, who had just entered, high-fived each other joyfully upon hearing the news, excitedly proclaiming that their grand adventures were about to set sail again. Neville looked puzzled, but Harry and Ron understood. If Blaine became an assistant professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts, it meant he couldn't keep a close watch on their magical mischief, which was like a dream come true for Fred and George. Boom! Hermione suddenly appeared, dropping the heavy tomes she was carrying onto the coffee table with a thud, nearly toppling it. She unceremoniously squeezed in next to Harry, forcing Neville, who occupied the most space, to stand up. Where have you been? We haven't seen you all day, Ron asked, frowning at Hermione, who seemed to be in high spirits. Where else, Ron? Of course, the library. I've missed classes for a whole month, and I have to catch up, Hermione replied, rolling her eyes as if Ron had asked a silly question. By the way, what were you talking about just now? About Blaine's new role as a professor's assistant, Harry said cautiously. We're discussing why this happened. Wasn't his purpose for coming to Hogwarts to capture the heir of Slytherin? Why is he suddenly involved with this class? Perhaps he's quietly dealt with the heir, Seamus speculated, eyes wide with intrigue. However, this theory was flimsy. Everyone knew that if the investigator had truly resolved the Chamber of Secrets incident, the school would have announced it with great fanfare. It's also possible he's given up on that plan, Dean suggested. Think about it. How could a young wizard, who seemingly appeared out of nowhere, solve something even Headmaster Dumbledore couldn't? Maybe he's trying to make some money before the headmaster kicks him out. From what I hear, professors are well paid. The absurd suggestion came from Dean. Dumbledore was not someone easily deceived. If Atticus Blaine truly harbored such a shameful plan, Headmaster Dumbledore would undoubtedly see through it. At least, that's what Harry believed. What do you think? Harry was relieved to see that, at least within this circle, no one considered him the heir of Slytherin anymore. He rubbed his numb leg, hesitating to voice his thoughts, mainly because he feared upsetting Hermione. I've encountered Mr. Blaine once. He's a powerful wizard. Could it be possible that he chose to become the professor of this course for a reason? A collective gasp filled the room, except from Hermione and Harry. Ron stared at Harry in horror, stammering, You mean Quirrell was his doing? Oh, Harry, I remember the first time you heard that. You overestimate his strength, Harry. Dean was the first to object, his voice sharp. I can't see him having such abilities. Aside from a few die-hard fans, it was widely accepted among young wizards that Gilderoy Lockhart was best at fabricating stories and flattering others. Being the heir of Slytherin was no easy feat, and even Ron, who had always disliked Lockhart, couldn't convince himself that Lockhart possessed such power. I know, it's hard to believe, Harry admitted, uncertain himself. But if it's just a disguise, like Quirrell's, he fooled everyone at first. Otherwise, I can't fathom why Mr. Blaine would take on this challenging role. He was also a student at Hogwarts. It doesn't make sense. Being a professor of this class rarely ends well. I mean, he might have noticed something, but he didn't. Harry couldn't continue because Hermione's heavy coughing interrupted him. Everyone turned to look at Hermione, whose expression had shifted from happy to grim. Ron asked in surprise, What do you think, Hermione? Hermione glared at Ron, then raised her chin defiantly. This morning, I went to Professor Lockhart's office. You went to Lockhart's office? Ron interrupted immediately. Don't you already have one of his autographs? Do you want another one? Harry quickly kicked Ron to remind him to be quiet. Whether Lockhart was a suspect or not, and why Hermione went to his office, didn't matter. What mattered was that in the coming years, he would need Hermione's help to get through potions and history of magic. If he angered her now, his future would be bleak. Later that night, Harry lay on his soft four-poster bed, eyes half closed, his mind filled with the ominous voice, his own Parseltongue, Dobby's warning, and Malfoy's revelation that the Chamber of Secrets had been opened 50 years ago. He was probably the most obsessed with this matter in the entire school. Until the culprit was caught and the Chamber of Secrets incident was resolved, he couldn't fully relax. But how is that possible, Harry? Ron, lying next to him, turned over and whispered, How could a wizard like Blaine be a fan of Lockhart? To get close to Lockhart, he became his assistant. Oh, Hermione's idea is so ridiculous. It's impossible. The things written in his book are true. Oh no, I don't believe that. I don't know either, Ron. Harry turned to face the window, staring at the brilliant galaxy, allowing the hazy drowsiness to seep into his consciousness. Before he fell completely asleep, Mr. Blaine's youthful face flashed in his mind, recalling that handsome, gentle smile and lavender eyes. He muttered, But at least we can look forward to this course. End of this chapter. Chapter 43. The Lockhart Way of Teaching. As February arrived, the gentle spring breeze coaxed new buds from the withered trees of the Forbidden Forest. Within the castle, the young wizards prepared to welcome Valentine's Day in 1993, a season brimming with life. For the first and second year students, still innocent to the world, Valentine's Day was a festival shrouded in mystery. However, for the older students, its significance was unmistakable. On the first morning of February's first week, Cedric Diggory of Hufflepuff, encouraged by his roommates, approached a beautiful Chinese-American girl at the entrance of the Ravenclaw common room. He presented her with a handmade singing Cupid card. Meanwhile, Percy Weasley, unable to contain his affection, transformed a salamander into the likeness of Penelope Clearwater during Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration class, grinning at her for several minutes when no one was watching. Headmaster Dumbledore, displaying his gentlemanly charm, ordered a bouquet of flowers from Hogsmeade for every female staff member at Hogwarts. Inspired by Dumbledore's gesture, Gilderoy Lockhart gleefully announced during lunch that he would compose a hymn for everyone at the school. He hinted at a grand plan to unveil this hymn on Valentine's Day. "Atticus, could you possibly rid us of this fool before that day arrives?" Snape muttered coldly, his face dark with disdain after hearing Lockhart's announcement. "I'll do my best, Professor," Atticus Blaine replied with a wry smile, chewing on a piece of bacon. "But why not concoct some poison yourself? You're a potions master, after all." After lunch, Atticus used his break to review the surveillance footage from the previous night, but found nothing of interest. That Monday afternoon, the sixth-year Gryffindor and Slytherin students had two shared Defense Against the Dark Arts lessons. It was Atticus's first time co-teaching with Lockhart, and out of respect, he donned a brand-new black wizard robe, arriving in the classroom before the students. By 10 minutes to 2, the sixth-year students began filing into the classroom, their faces a mix of surprise and excitement. Lockhart had yet to arrive, leaving Atticus alone on the podium. Smiling at the boisterous Gryffindor and Slytherin students seated in their respective sections, though many of them had attended school with Atticus, he only recognized a few. "Flint, I hear you're the captain of the Slytherin team now?" Atticus inquired, causing the classroom to fall silent as all eyes turned to Marcus Flint and Atticus. "Yes, sir. I mean Professor Blaine," Flint replied, standing up instinctively. Tall and imposing, he resembled a troll, and the prospect of addressing a professor was daunting. Known for his rough play on the Quidditch pitch, Flint appeared nervous, his tone reserved. That happened last year. As a former Slytherin himself, Atticus felt a sense of loyalty to his house's team. He nodded approvingly. "Then you should work hard, Flint. I hope the Slytherin team can achieve great things under your leadership." At Atticus's words, the Gryffindor students' curiosity turned to coldness, and some die-hard Quidditch fans even glared with disdain. Oliver Wood and Percy Weasley, seated among the crowd, exchanged glances before lowering their heads, pretending to study the open pages of Walking with Trolls on their desks. Atticus's encouragement left the young wizards buzzing with anticipation for the lessons ahead. The students of Slytherin were filled with pride. They subconsciously likened Professor Atticus Blaine to Professor Snape, believing both were fiercely protective of their own. Marcus Flint, the first to be acknowledged, was slightly smug. He cast a disdainful glance at the dejected Oliver Wood, then grinned slyly and exclaimed, "Thank you for your support, Professor Blaine. We in Slytherin are thrilled about your appointment as a teaching assistant. We believe you'll be the best Defense Against the Dark Arts professor in recent years. So, what will you be teaching us?" Oliver Wood, nearly hiding his face beneath the table, made a discreet face of disgust. Even Percy, the model student, seemed less than pleased. "Hey, thank you for your support too, Flint," Atticus Blaine replied, choosing not to address Marcus Flint's obvious flattery. He nodded and smiled. "As you mentioned, Flint, I'm just a teaching assistant. The teaching plan is still under Professor Lockhart's direction." At that moment, Lockhart entered the room with a flourish, wearing a dark plum-colored robe. Atticus noticed that in all his encounters with Professor Lockhart, he had never seen him wear the same color twice. "Is writing books really that profitable?" Atticus mused as he approached to greet him. "It seems you've already introduced yourself, Professor Blaine." Lockhart beamed, giving Atticus a hearty pat on the shoulder, as if addressing a favored protege. Just a quick hello, Professor Lockhart, Atticus replied, smoothly shifting his shoulder away and smiling warmly. Like the students, I'm eager for your captivating lecture. Oh, great, it's the same old routine, someone whispered among the Gryffindor students. Atticus's expression twitched slightly, and he was certain Lockhart had heard it too, as his expression momentarily faltered before regaining composure. So, Atticus, uncertain of what was to come, looked around the suddenly subdued classroom. Where do we begin, Professor Lockhart? Oh, don't worry, Blaine. The students are already familiar with it. Over the next 2 hours, Atticus witnessed Lockhart's unique teaching method. Lockhart called on students one by one, having them read lengthy passages from his own books, insisting they do so with full voice and emotion. He stood at the podium, feigning ignorance of the students' pained expressions, his face alight with joy. If a recitation lacked emotion, Lockhart would personally demonstrate, adding exaggerated and comical gestures in a futile attempt to enliven the class. Ultimately, no one paid him any mind. All Atticus could do was help maintain classroom discipline. Is this how you always teach them? Atticus inquired tactfully, as Lockhart caught his breath after a dramatic reading about subduing a troll. Aha, eager to make your mark, are you? Lockhart pointed a finger at Atticus, his eyes gleaming with misplaced understanding. Ignoring Atticus's explanation, he interrupted Percy's monotonous reading. Your chance for fame is right here, Blaine. It's up to you to seize it. He thrust the textbook into Atticus's hands and announced to the class, let's see how a true enthusiast pays homage to Professor Lockhart with a passionate voice. Amidst the laughter from Wood and the bewildered expressions of the students, Atticus stood beside Lockhart at the podium, unsure of what to do next. End of this chapter. Chapter 44. The Lockhart Way of Teaching. As Atticus Blaine watched a group of jubilant young wizards exit the classroom, he was filled with confusion and doubt about life. However, he finally understood why both Headmaster Dumbledore and McGonagall couldn't tolerate Lockhart's unique teaching methods. Initially, he thought it might be an isolated incident, but as he made his way back to his office, having been forced to read half a book, he realized the absurdity of Lockhart's approach. In the following days, the harsh reality became clear. Lockhart's teaching style was utterly ridiculous. How did Dumbledore find such an oddity? Atticus mused on Thursday morning as he left the first-year class to head to the Great Hall for dinner. He felt a pang of sympathy for the young wizards. During his own time at the school, the defense against the dark arts professors changed annually, each with varying levels of competence. Yet, despite their differences, those professors taught with genuine intent, unlike Lockhart, who had turned the class into a recitation and acting session. Speaking of acting, an incident occurred the previous afternoon during his first session with Potter's grade. Atticus had hoped Lockhart might restrain himself in front of the protagonist, but he was sorely mistaken. For 2 full hours, Atticus played a simple villager from the Himalayas, grateful to Lockhart, while Lockhart forced Potter to play a snowman, casting himself as the hero. Do something, Professor Blaine, Harry pleaded after the defense against the dark arts class ended. He clutched his bruised calf, having been knocked off the table by Lockhart. I can't thank you enough. Ron stifled his laughter, but soon winced in pain as Hermione, carrying several of Lockhart's books, accidentally stepped on him. I thought your performance was brilliant, Professor Blaine. Hermione glared at Ron, blushing as she complimented Atticus before quickly leaving. Great show? Is that the point, Miss Granger? Atticus wondered, watching the young girl dash out with a puzzled expression. She sees things differently than we do, Professor Blaine, Dean Thomas explained. Hermione admires Professor Lockhart and has been trying to convince everyone that the absurd adventures in his books are true. She hasn't been able to provide evidence, but now she thinks she's found a fan of Professor Lockhart, a weighty character. Who is it? Atticus asked, raising an eyebrow. It's you, Professor Blaine, Harry replied cautiously. Hermione told me she heard Professor Lockhart say you're his die-hard fan. Atticus rolled his eyes, contemplating Professor Snape's previous suggestion. During lunch, while Lockhart chatted with the ever-enthusiastic Professor Flitwick, Professor McGonagall leaned over and whispered sternly, Professor Blaine, Hogwarts didn't hire you to follow him. Show your true level to the young wizards. You promised me, Atticus. Atticus set down his lemon meringue, scanning the bustling great hall. He noticed Draco Malfoy at the Slytherin table eyeing him curiously, while a few Ravenclaw students pointed and giggled. Headmaster Dumbledore, Atticus began, blinking calmly. Any advice, Atticus? Dumbledore, seemingly detached from the situation, shook his beard and emerged from his focus on a cauldron cake. Would you mind if I wanted to buy Professor Lockhart a drink and accidentally added something to his glass, causing him to rest in his hospital bed for a while? Snape, who had been staring at the floor, finally looked up. A slight smirk played on his lips, and a hint of expression flickered in his usually vacant eyes. Remember what I taught you in your first class, Atticus? Powder of narcissus root added to an infusion of wormwood creates a powerful sleeping potion, a dose of death water, which can normally leave a person stupefied in bed for a week. But if taken with a high concentration of alcohol and not treated properly, it can keep someone in a state of confusion, making it difficult to speak, and this state can last for 2 months. Atticus nodded at Snape nonchalantly. You know, Professor Snape, my memory has always been very good. What's your opinion, Headmaster Dumbledore? Ahem, Atticus. Dumbledore suddenly raised his head, studying the patterns on the chandeliers above the auditorium. His blue eyes, usually so penetrating, appeared rather dazed. I am 110 years old this year. The power of time is truly frightening. Recently, I've noticed my legs and feet aren't as flexible as they used to be. My eyesight is fading, and my hearing is a bit dull. So, I didn't catch a word of what you and Severus were discussing just now. Professor McGonagall pursed her lips tightly, staring at him half helplessly and half angrily. But Dumbledore didn't give her a chance to complain. He stood up and addressed everyone, mentioning that he needed to rest due to his mental fatigue, and left directly. Before 9 o'clock tonight, I will deliver what you need to your office, Professor Snape said as he stood up, his demeanor suggesting impatience to leave. Bobby! Under Atticus's meaningful gaze, Professor McGonagall, a little ashamed and annoyed, turned to Madame Pomfrey, who was making fish soup. If you're free tonight, could you come to my office? I have something I want to discuss with you alone. Oh, no problem, Minerva, I'll be on time. Madame Pomfrey, who thought her salary might be raised, agreed happily, her face radiant. Ahem, Professor Lockhart. After Professor McGonagall left, the staff table, once full, was now almost half empty. Flitwick had quickly departed while Atticus was talking to Lockhart, his swift movements reminiscent of his days as a duel champion. Aha, Atticus, I also want to get my Valentine's Day card in advance like Phileas. Oh, this is really embarrassing for me, but it's actually like this. Atticus interrupted Lockhart's lengthy speech. I heard from Miss Granger in my second-year defense class that your favorite birthday present is a case of Ogden's Old Fire whiskey. Oh, coincidentally, I happen to have a bottle that's over 80 years old, a gift from the headmaster. May I have the honor of inviting you to the Three Broomsticks for a drink this Saturday? What do you two have to say now? At the Gryffindor table, Hermione, who had been eavesdropping on the professor's conversation, glanced at Harry and Ron, who were exchanging looks. She raised her chin proudly. He's his fan. End of this chapter. Chapter 45. My Letter. The first weekend in February was blessed with sunshine. With Valentine's Day approaching, the school courtyard, the banks of the Black Lake, and the edges of the Forbidden Forest were suddenly dotted with senior students, couples nestled together. Professors, though visibly displeased, chose to ignore the affectionate exchanges as students touched noses and whispered sweet nothings, indifferent to the appropriateness of the setting. Immorality. Why don't the prefects and professors intervene? Hermione grumbled to herself as she made her way to the library early that morning. She had already passed at least 5 or 6 such couples, and her irritation grew with each encounter. The library was quieter than usual. Apart from the stern Mrs. Pintz, who sat in her usual spot engrossed in a book with a gilded cover, the vast rows of narrow aisles were nearly empty. Only a handful of senior students, preparing for their owl and newt exams, occupied the space. Yet this tranquility did not deter Hermione's determination. She navigated the bookshelves with practiced ease, searching for the texts she needed. Ah, found it, she murmured, stopping in front of a shelf lined with tomes of ancient covers. She reached up, pulling down Ancient Forgotten Magic and Curses from the top shelf. Leaning against the shelf, she delved into the intricate text, hoping to uncover the cause behind Colin and Justin's petrification. Meanwhile, Fred and George's abrupt departure had forced Wood to cancel the day's Quidditch practice, much to his frustration. This unexpected turn of events granted Harry a rare free weekend morning. He had intended to join Hermione in her search for clues, but Ron had other ideas. "It's rare for Wood to let you off," Ron exclaimed, cheeks puffed as he fed a small piece of grilled sausage to Scabbers. "Don't waste your precious weekend on things that might not even matter, Harry. Seamus got a new set of gobstones. I can borrow it, and we can have some fun." Harry, easily swayed, agreed, leaving Hermione to venture to the library alone, determined to find any hint of the attacks amidst the vast sea of knowledge. Sunlight filtered through the dust-laden air and the gaps between the bookshelves, casting intricate shadows on Hermione's youthful, focused face. As time passed, the stack of books around her grew, towering over her slender shoulders. Atticus Blaine, emerging from the restricted section, paused to observe her. A flicker of nostalgia stirred within him, as if he saw a reflection of his younger self in Hermione's dedication. "Miss Granger," he called softly. "Ah, Professor Blaine!" Hermione, startled from her reading, turned to see him approaching with a warm smile. She hastily closed the book in her arms and stood up straight. "I'm sorry, Professor. I didn't realize you were here." This was the first time Hermione had encountered Professor Blaine in private since their awkward meeting at the school hospital over Christmas break. Atticus glanced at the book clutched in her arms, understanding her intent. He nodded and asked gently, "Are you searching for clues about the Chamber of Secrets?" Upon Hermione's affirmative nod, Atticus looked around, his tone curious. "Are you alone, Miss Granger? Where are your friends, Potter and Mr. Weasley? Didn't they come to help?" "Oh, those two." Hermione's frustration flared momentarily. She was tempted to vent about Harry and Ron's absence, but instead explained that Harry had Quidditch practice and Ron was studying in the common room. Having completed her herbal homework ahead of schedule, Hermione found herself with time to spare and decided to visit the library. Ho, ho. Even without the use of legilimency, Atticus Blaine could discern the truth behind her words, yet he chose not to expose her. Instead, he nodded with understanding. "The strong are often alone, Miss Granger. Keep going," he said cryptically before departing. Long after Professor Blaine's figure vanished around the corner of the bookshelves, Hermione stood there, pondering his enigmatic words. They seemed to infuse her with a newfound determination. The arm that had grown weary from holding books all morning felt rejuvenated, and her amber eyes sparkled with clarity once more. "Come on, Hermione," she encouraged herself, clenching her fists before diving back into the shelves with renewed vigor. Meanwhile, Atticus strolled through the bustling streets of Hogsmeade. His new status attracted many young wizards who approached him with greetings, to which he responded with friendly nods. However, his attention was soon drawn to two not-so-tall wizards in black cloaks, causing him to frown. After a moment's thought, he altered his course to follow them into a secluded alleyway. Atticus trailed them to the Hogshead Inn, but chose not to enter. Instead, he waited outside with a playful expression. As expected, within minutes, the inn's irritable owner bellowed, and the two cloaked figures stumbled out. Before they could exchange words, they noticed Atticus watching them with a sneer from a few feet away. Embarrassment, fear, and helplessness gripped the two men in black. They stood trembling at the inn's entrance, bracing for the inevitable reprimand. "No, brother, he can't see our faces clearly," the man on the right whispered urgently, tugging at his companion's sleeve. The other, catching on, rasped from beneath his cloak, "Ahem, don't meddle in others' affairs, kid. We kill without hesitation." Atticus glared at the two Weasley troublemakers as they fled, his face lined with exasperation. He resolved to teach them a lesson at the earliest opportunity. As he turned away, he caught sight of Percy Weasley passionately kissing his Ravenclaw prefect girlfriend beneath a golden cherub. This family, he mused, was full of exceptional talents in the wizarding world. Atticus quickly averted his gaze and made his way to the Three Broomsticks. Later that evening, Hermione recounted to Ron and Harry, who had spent the day languishing in the common room, what Professor Blaine had said in the library. Unfortunately, neither Harry nor Ron could decipher the meaning of his words. But, Ron mused, wrinkling his nose and gesturing animatedly, it sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? Imagine, Harry, in the Quidditch final, Gryffindor is trailing Slytherin, and just as everyone gives up hope, you catch the snitch right in front of Malfoy before Adrian Pusey makes the winning shot. Malfoy would be so mad he couldn't eat for a year. If that happens, Ron, I'd gladly help Malfoy eat a year's worth of food in one day. Harry laughed, picturing the scene Ron described. Hermione rolled her eyes, ready to chide them, when a sudden commotion erupted in the hall. A large crowd surged in, surrounding something of interest. Harry and Ron's laughter ceased, and Hermione quickly realized that something significant had occurred. She quickly dropped the food she was holding and rushed over to find out what was happening. On the marble stairs, Principal Dumbledore descended rapidly, accompanied by several professors, all wearing serious expressions. After a moment, he dispersed the crowd and led Atticus Blaine, who was assisting Lockhart, up the stairs. The heir of Slytherin was back in action. Harry, who had been in high spirits just moments before, felt his heart plunge into icy depths as he immediately considered the worst possible scenario. Exchanging a glance with the pale-faced Ron, the two hurriedly followed. In the school hospital, Lockhart lay on a bed, a shadow of his former handsome self. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot and wide open, and he was making incoherent sounds. Madame Pomfrey was examining him, and her grave expression suggested the situation was dire. Dumbledore, showing his usual fairness, allowed the students to come in and see Professor Lockhart. They stood outside the curtain, exchanging anxious glances, while Hermione pushed her way to the front. Upon seeing Lockhart's pitiful state, she suddenly covered her mouth and began to sob softly. Atticus, witnessing this scene, let a pang of guilt, wondering if he had gone too far. However, when he noticed Professor Snape lurking in the shadows, seemingly suppressing laughter, his mood steadied once more. "How is he, Poppy?" Dumbledore asked, standing by Lockhart's bed, his expression unreadable, though his voice carried a weight of concern. "Very bad, Headmaster Dumbledore," Madame Pomfrey replied, casting a quick glance at the stern Professor McGonagall. She explained to everyone, "Severe alcohol allergy, Headmaster. He'll likely be bedridden until Easter. Oh, doesn't anyone know that Professor Lockhart can't handle alcoholic beverages?" Wasn't Professor Lockhart's most desired birthday gift a case of Ogden's Old Fire whiskey? Hermione, tears in her eyes, looked up blankly upon hearing Madame Pomfrey's diagnosis. "It's all my fault, Headmaster Dumbledore." Atticus stepped forward, his face a mask of sorrow. "I invited Professor Lockhart to drink, unaware of his condition. He probably didn't want to offend me by refusing. I'm truly ashamed. If you'll allow it, I can take responsibility and resign now." No. Before Professor McGonagall could respond, to everyone's surprise, the ailing Professor Lockhart spoke with surprising willpower. He reached out a trembling hand towards Atticus and whispered something inaudible. "What did you say, Professor Lockhart? Do you have something else to tell us?" Atticus asked, nervously pushing Dumbledore aside and crouching by the bed to hold Lockhart's hand, ready to cast a spell if necessary. "Granger," Lockhart unexpectedly called out Hermione's name. Atticus frowned, but honored Lockhart's last wish by summoning Hermione to the bedside. "Here I am, Professor. What would you like to say to me?" Hermione asked, her face streaked with tears, her voice filled with sorrow. "What do you need me to do for you, Professor?" "You fans, you two." Lockhart rasped, his face ashen. "Write me a reply." End of this chapter. Chapter 46. Professor Blaine's First Lesson. On Monday morning, the charms and herbology classes were a lost cause. Almost no one paid attention, as whispers about Saturday's events filled the room. Even Hermione, usually the epitome of focus, seemed pale and distracted. By lunchtime, the question of whether Professor Lockhart had an allergic reaction to alcohol or had consumed poisoned wine remained unanswered. The second class this afternoon will be a joint session for first and second year students from all 4 houses in defense against the dark arts, held in the auditorium, announced the male and female prefects, who had hurried down from the professor's chair to relay the surprising news to the murmuring students. "Why?" Ron asked, turning to Siamus with certainty that Lockhart had been poisoned. He looked at Percy in surprise. If I remember correctly, the second class in the afternoon should be History of Magic. That's what Professor McGonagall said, Ron. If you have any doubts, you can ask her yourself, Percy replied, rushing past Harry and the others to deliver the news to Ginny and the others closer to the hall. That afternoon, Harry and his friends, weary from Transfiguration class, arrived at the auditorium to find it transformed. Rows of desks, numbering around 160 or 170, filled the space. First and second-year students from the other three houses had already gathered, buzzing with excitement over this unusual teaching method and speculating about what Professor Blaine would teach them. "This brings back bad memories," Harry muttered. "I just hope it doesn't turn into a big stage play." As time passed, the desks filled with students from all four houses. When the last seat was taken, Atticus Blaine finally made his entrance. Descending the marble stairs, he nimbly leaped onto the high platform, standing at its center with a smile as he surveyed the eager crowd. His first words silenced the room, only to be followed by a roar of excitement. "Now, everyone, put Professor Lockhart's book back in your bag. You won't be needing it in my class." "Oh, who?" shouted Hufflepuff's Macmillan, his voice triggering an avalanche of cheers and howls that reverberated throughout the auditorium, even causing the large chandeliers above to tremble. "Can you believe it? I've been waiting for this for more than half a year," Dean exclaimed, tossing his copy of Break Up the Female Ghost into his school bag with a laugh. Ron seemed eager to express similar sentiments, but Harry, grinning, stopped him and discreetly pointed to Hermione, who sat in front of them, looking startled. After a quick exchange of glances, they both suppressed their excitement and put away their books. The cheers ebbed and flowed for several minutes until Atticus Blaine's heavy cough brought them to a gradual halt. "Now, I may need to explain to all of you," Atticus said, smiling and nodding to the audience. "I imagine you're all wondering why I've chosen this method of teaching." Clearing his throat, he continued, "For various reasons, the defense against the dark arts faculty has been unstable. Due to the frequent change of professors, the quality of this course at Hogwarts has been criticized. Your time to learn defense skills is limited, so to effectively enhance your ability to defend against danger, I've decided to make a few changes." As soon as Siamus finished speaking, he raised his right hand and, with great interest, addressed Atticus Blaine on the high platform. "Introduce yourself, Professor. We know you're here as an investigator sent by the school board to look into the Chamber of Secrets, but what did you do before this?" "That's an interesting question, Mr. Finnegan," Atticus replied, scratching his head as he surveyed the curious eyes fixed on him. After a moment of thought, he raised his eyebrows and said, "Well, before coming to Hogwarts, I was something of a freelancer. I ran errands, sourced potion ingredients, delivered goods, just enough to get by. I'm just a small-time guy, not nearly as renowned as Professor Lockhart." "I don't quite believe that," Ron whispered to Harry, curling his lip, and Harry nodded in agreement. Atticus's vague self-introduction left the young wizards unsatisfied, and the room's atmosphere grew slightly tense as everyone awaited his next words. "I suppose you're all wondering what I'll be teaching you," Atticus resumed, his voice confident and steady. The students gradually ceased their whispering, their attention riveted on him. "However, I'd like to turn that question back to you. What do you hope to learn from me?" "A powerful spell." Blaise Zabini, a second-year Slytherin, immediately raised his hand and exclaimed, "I want to learn powerful spells, Professor Blaine, because I believe only powerful spells can fend off danger and counter dark magic." Zabini's words resonated with the young wizards, even prompting hesitant nods from the Gryffindor students who typically scoffed at Slytherin. "Though your understanding of countering dark magic may not be particularly deep, it's a good answer, Mr. Zabini." Atticus nodded approvingly. He then looked around at the students encircling him and continued, "Since you're so interested in powerful spells, let's start there. So, who can tell me what makes a spell powerful?" Professor Blaine's question was unusual, leaving the young wizards exchanging puzzled glances. Many turned their attention to Hermione, who, not disappointing them, stood up with her hand raised. If I understand you correctly, Hermione began, taking a deep breath as she gathered her thoughts, a powerful spell would be ancient magic, much of which is lost today. Can you elaborate, Miss Granger? Atticus asked, his interest piqued. Ancient magic is renowned for its formidable power, Hermione explained. In a narrow sense, it refers to spells invented by ancient wizards from the tribal era up to 800 years ago. Back then, the natural environment was harsh, and many dangerous magical creatures, now extinct, were prevalent. To combat these threats, wise ancient wizards developed spells focused on power. However, as Muggle and wizard civilizations advanced, humans tamed nature, and magic's role shifted from survival to daily convenience. The rapid development of wand technology and its compatibility with modern magic made spellcasting easier, rendering ancient magic, though powerful, complex, obscure, and demanding in terms of magical power. Excellent, Miss Granger. Atticus applauded enthusiastically. I don't think anyone will object to me awarding 10 points to Gryffindor. Hermione sat down, her face glowing with pride. Ron sat down with a flushed face, his eyes fixed expectantly on Professor Atticus Blaine. Professor Blaine, do you mean you want to learn about our mysterious ancient magic? End of this chapter. Chapter 47, Professor Blaine's First Lesson. Facing Ron Weasley's earnest gaze, Atticus Blaine smiled, choosing not to answer his question directly. Instead, he steered the conversation back to the course at hand. Defense against the dark arts, he began, is a subject I prefer to call defense against dangers. This is a comprehensive course. The spells, transfiguration, herbs, potions, and even the protection of magical creatures you learn at this school all play a role in this knowledge. To handle any incoming danger effectively, you must possess 3 qualities: skills, methods, and courage. It was a rare opportunity to attend a serious defense against the dark arts class at Hogwarts. Even the students who typically disliked studying were focused intently on Professor Blaine as he spoke from the high platform. Hermione, however, was the only one diligently jotting down every word in her notebook. Atticus turned to Ron with another smile. I'm not going to teach you any powerful ancient magic, Mr. Weasley, he said, noting Ron's disappointment. Addressing the entire class, he continued, and here's why. First, I am not a charms teacher. Teaching charms is Professor Flitwick's responsibility, not mine. Second, there was a time when I was truly fascinated by the power of ancient magic. However, as my research deepened, I discovered that most ancient magic has vanished over time. Even if I dedicated my entire life to it, I might never master authentic ancient magic. Atticus paced to the other side of the platform, glancing at Blaise Zabini, who seemed eager to learn a powerful spell. What I excel at is modifying the spell model based on modern spells. I optimize and transform them so that their power approaches that of ancient magic while maintaining a manageable level of difficulty. Perhaps the topic was too advanced, as most of the young wizards appeared bewildered, struggling to grasp the concept. Observing this, Atticus paused, contemplating a demonstration. He drew his wand, and the students immediately perked up, eager for their favorite part of the lesson. Now, Atticus said, scanning the room, let's have a demonstration. Who can name a spell you're proficient in? The auditorium erupted with excitement, the students' animated discussions resembling a swarm of buzzing bees. Leg-locking curse, Professor Blaine. I'm good at this. Lavender Brown from Gryffindor exclaimed, raising her hand enthusiastically. The Bat-Bogey Hex. Ginny Weasley, looking pale, raised her hand weakly, but her voice was drowned out by the noisy crowd, and Atticus didn't hear her. Professor Blaine, let me suggest one, Malfoy interjected with a smirk, glancing at Harry. Tarantella Dance! Crabbe and Goyle burst into laughter, while Harry, not to be outdone, stood up and glared at Malfoy, suggesting another spell with a grin. The students eagerly shared various spells, such as the Incisor Matchstick, Hair Loss Curse, and Tongue-Tying Spell. Yet, none of these suggestions aligned with Atticus's intentions. Wait, Atticus called out, his expression stern, silencing the students. Ahem, no one mentioned a standard spell. The students exchanged glances, falling silent. Finally, Ron raised his hand hesitantly. The levitation charm, Professor Blaine. I'm quite proficient in that. Very well, Mr. Weasley. Atticus, relieved to hear a familiar spell, approached Ron with encouragement. Show everyone your levitation charm, Mr. Weasley. Ron blushed, muttering the incantation under his breath. Both Harry and Hermione understood Ron's concern, so they quickly spoke up on his behalf. "Is your wand broken?" Atticus Blaine raised an eyebrow. "May I take a look?" When Ron reluctantly pulled out his wand, held together by magical tape to prevent it from splitting in two, Malfoy burst into laughter. "Choose someone else, Professor Blaine. Weasley's wand might endanger us all." The Slytherin students joined in the laughter, adding to Ron's embarrassment. His face and ears turned as red as if scalded by boiling water. "I fail to see the humor in that, Mr. Malfoy. Mocking others doesn't reflect well on your character," Atticus said, turning to face them. Though his tone was calm, his gaze was as chilling as a winter's cold shower, silencing the Slytherins. Even Draco Malfoy closed his mouth, not daring to utter another word. "Can you fix it, Professor Blaine?" Ron asked hopefully, as Harry, Hermione, and he looked gratefully at Atticus, who was examining the broken wand. Atticus didn't immediately respond. He knelt down, placed Ron's wand on the ground, and his eyes flickered with concentration. "Restore as usual," he commanded. The broken wand trembled, emitting a burst of bright red sparks from the fracture, and then it fused back together. "You fixed it, Professor Blaine?" Ron exclaimed, his eyes shining with awe. "I asked many people, and they all said it was beyond repair." "Their assessments weren't incorrect, Mr. Weasley," Atticus replied, scrutinizing the wand. After a moment, he smiled and continued. "A wand is a very precise alchemical tool. While I've used magic to restore its appearance, I can't mend the internal damage. You can use it for now, but it won't last long. I recommend visiting Ollivanders for a new one during the summer break." Despite Atticus's warning, Ron was visibly pleased. "Wingardium Leviosa," he attempted, beginning the demonstration. Casting a spell under so many watchful eyes was new for Ron, but the encouragement from Professor Blaine, Harry, and Hermione bolstered his confidence. After a few nervous tries, Ron managed to levitate the feather conjured by Professor Blaine. "Very well, Mr. Weasley. An excellent levitation spell," Atticus applauded, smiling. "Now, try channeling more magic power." Many were surprised, recalling Professor Flitwick's advice to control the magic output for this spell. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion, and the feather burst into fluff, showering Ron, who stood bewildered. "Well done, Mr. Weasley. You've earned 2 points for Gryffindor. Now, let me show you mine," Atticus said, allowing Ron to step aside. He met the curious gazes of the young wizards, then slowly raised his arm. With a low incantation, his wrist vibrated. "Canradi Leviosa!" Clang! The delicate, fluffy feather transformed with a sharp metallic clang, as if it had become an indestructible blade. "Observe what my levitation charm can achieve," Atticus declared, raising his arm high. A white light shot forth like cold electricity, swiftly enveloping a large, elegantly designed metal chandelier hanging above the auditorium. A sudden gust of wind swept through the room as the white light danced around the chandelier's metal frame. Before anyone could react, it returned to Professor Blaine's palm with a buzz and a bang. "Professor, run! The lamp is about to fall!" cried Hannah Abbott from Hufflepuff, her voice breaking the tense silence. She was the first to avert her horrified gaze. Her shrill cry spurred the young wizards into action, prompting them to scatter to the edges of the room. In their haste, they didn't forget to rush past Atticus Blaine, who stood calmly amidst the chaos. A collective gasp of terror echoed through the hall. "Ho ho!" Atticus chuckled at the spectacle before him. Just as the massive metal frame of the chandelier threatened to crash down and flatten him, he casually waved his wand. In an astonishing display, the chandelier seemed to reverse its fall, reassembling itself mid-air before gracefully hanging back from the auditorium ceiling. "A powerful spell indeed, Monsieur Zabini," Atticus remarked, stepping elegantly to the edge of the platform. His eyes fell on Blaise Zabini, who was struggling beneath Crabbe's weight. With a gentle smile, Atticus continued, "Now, do you understand the truth?" Though the situation had not fully resolved, the immediate danger had ceased. The room, once filled with panic, began to settle. Note, the narrative ends here, with a note about updates and a call for support, which seems unrelated to the story's content. Chapter 48, Professor Blaine's First Lesson. The second class on Thursday morning was a combined session for the 5th, 6th, and 7th years. The Defense Against the Dark Arts class was held in the auditorium, accommodating students from 3 different grades. For these senior students, who had already received some education in defense and were nearing graduation, Professor Atticus Blaine had something special to impart. The premise of defense techniques, Professor Blaine began, is that they are only effective when the strength is equal or similar. For instance, even if I were to share all the knowledge about dueling and defense that I possess, you might not last more than 3 seconds against Headmaster Dumbledore. Laughter erupted from the senior students. Penelope Clearwater, a Ravenclaw and Percy Weasley's girlfriend, raised her hand with curiosity. So, Professor Blaine, could you defeat Headmaster Dumbledore? Don't ask me such embarrassing questions, Miss Clearwater. Atticus replied with a smile, turning to address the rest of the class. There is a way of categorizing strength among wizards who have received traditional magical education. I think you might find it useful. The auditorium fell silent as over 200 pairs of curious eyes focused on the eloquent Professor Blaine. As you all know, he continued, some traditional wizarding schools still use a one-on-one mode of training successors. According to ancient tradition, young wizards who are still learning magic are called wizard apprentices. In modern terms, a wizard apprentice at their peak would be a young wizard who has achieved more than 4 OWL certificates. The students brightened at this, as most of them could reach this level. However, Professor Blaine's next words were a sobering reminder. The prerequisite is to obtain these certificates with excellent grades. Percy Weasley, his face flushed with pride, held his head high. He was the only student at Hogwarts to achieve all outstanding grades in his OWLs, clearly surpassing the level of a wizard apprentice. What's next, Professor? What's above wizard apprentices? Marcus Flint asked eagerly, showing interest in the subject for the first time. Next is the official wizard, Atticus explained. However, the range of abilities at this level is vast. In modern magic education, it spans from students who barely pass their OWLs to those at the level of elite Aurors. He paused, considering his words. The description might not be entirely accurate, as this isn't a systematic classification. The students were less concerned with Professor Blaine's apology and more eager to learn. Those with family members in the Ministry of Magic, especially, were keen to pry more information from him. Please continue, Professor. Percy, momentarily forgetting his prefect duties, urged Atticus on. The peak of an official wizard is likely the highest achievement most people can reach in their magical studies. Beyond that, it's a realm few can access. In ancient times, only those with exceptional talent and luck could forge their own unique magical paths, earning the title of court wizard from the royal family. The term court wizard sent a ripple of excitement through the young wizards, who whispered animatedly among themselves. The discussion had reached its peak. Many students were abuzz with the rumor that, according to Professor Blaine, one of their elders was a court wizard. Imagine the potion skills of Professor Snape, the transfiguration expertise of Professor McGonagall, the adept use of modern spells by Professor Flitwick, and the herbal knowledge of Professor Sprout. In ancient times, all of them would have been revered as court wizards. Professor Blaine's words, delivered with a smile, ignited a fervent debate in the auditorium that lasted nearly 10 minutes. However, the conversation soon veered in a direction Atticus Blaine hadn't anticipated. Each student passionately believed that the head of their house was the rightful court wizard, dismissing the merits of the oath. Their 3 houses, Severus Snape in particular, bore the brunt of the criticism. Students from Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff whispered that Snape, who spent his time in the basement brewing potions, was unworthy of the esteemed title of court wizard. This infuriated the Slytherin students, and the towering Flint stood like a wall before them, channeling his Quidditch prowess. He climbed onto his desk, glaring at the doubters, ready to defend Slytherin's honor. Flint, get off the table before I lose my temper. Atticus Blaine's calm and steady voice cut through the tension. Marcus, who had been seething moments before, immediately calmed down, stepped off the table, and apologized sincerely to Atticus. I shared this with you to give you a basic understanding, Atticus continued. When you face danger in the future, don't recklessly charge at powerful wizards beyond your strength. It's not your battle to fight. The students realized that, besides Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape, There was another wizard at Hogwarts who commanded respect without raising his voice. After restoring order with his penetrating gaze, Atticus nodded in satisfaction. Now, let's return to our previous topic, how to deal with a werewolf during a full moon. It's actually quite simple. You just need to. Professor Blaine, interrupted Miss Clearwater, who had earlier inquired if Atticus could defeat Dumbledore. She raised her hand again. Any questions, Miss Clearwater? Atticus approached the cluster of Ravenclaw students, his demeanor gentle, already anticipating the question from this inquisitive Ravenclaw. You haven't finished yet, Professor Blaine, Penelope Clearwater said, rubbing her ankles under the desk, having been jostled in the earlier commotion. Her endearing demeanor made her seem even more charming, especially to those in the Gryffindor section. Wizard apprentice, official wizard, court wizard. What's next, Professor? Are there more? She asked. Oh, Atticus feigned a moment of recollection, smiling mysteriously as he scanned the room, teasing the eager students. I did forget. There is indeed one more. The anticipation was palpable. The bell signaling the end of class had already rung, and the sound of hundreds of footsteps echoed from the ceiling of the auditorium. Some students, eager to know more, had already gathered by the second-floor railing, peering down. Come on, Professor. Class is over. The students in the Defense Against the Dark Arts class were no longer content with silent pleas. They stood up, urging him in hushed voices. At that moment, the crowd gathered on the second floor parted effortlessly, revealing Albus Dumbledore, who was cheerfully enjoying his meal. He appeared on the marble staircase, a warm smile gracing his face. Saint? Atticus Blaine nodded to Dumbledore, returning the smile. End of this chapter. Chapter 49. Reactions. Since the events of Monday afternoon's Defense Against the Dark Arts class had become the talk of the castle, there was only one topic of conversation in the following days. Atticus Blaine. According to Cho Chang of Ravenclaw, during dinner that day, Professor Flitwick, upon hearing about the levitation spell demonstrated by Professor Blaine, rushed into Blaine's office without a word and remained there for a full 4 hours. Fred and George confirmed the reliability of this news. Past 1 o'clock in the morning, while they were adventuring through the castle, they happened to see Professor Flitwick leaving Blaine's office, exhausted but with a contented smile on his rosy cheeks. "Watch this," Ron exclaimed, standing on the sofa in the common room. He controlled a goose feather he had pulled from the sofa cushion, roaring dramatically, "Behold my royal curse!" He shook his repaired wand vigorously, mimicking Professor Blaine's actions from that day, pointing it skyward. Everyone nearby watched as the feather floated above Ron's head, slowly ascending like a snail to the ceiling, eventually disappearing in the glow of the candlelight. Harry, sitting with a copy of Flying with the Cannons that Ron had given him over the Christmas holidays, hiccuped happily at the sight. Ever since Professor Blaine had repaired Ron's wand in class and awarded him his first bonus of the semester, Ron had become a devoted fan, completely forgetting that Blaine used alchemical tools to monitor the students' moods. To be honest, Ron's antics were not unique in the castle. Malfoy had once attempted to use the levitation charm on a wooden stick in Transfiguration class, hoping it would fly over and poke Harry in the eye, only to have Professor McGonagall deduct 20 points in anger. Professor Blaine's performance in class had been so impressive that even Harry found himself secretly practicing with his wand in the dormitory when no one was around. "If I could perform like Professor Blaine," Ron declared, jumping off the sofa cushion. He gazed at the chandelier above and whispered dreamily, "Let's see who dares to underestimate me then. I'll poke 1,000 needle holes in Percy's backside with a feather and 2 big holes in Malfoy's face." "If you really want to do all that, Ron," Hermione interjected impatiently from where she was writing at the table, "then you should sit down with me and seriously study the spell model of this royal object charm instead of making random gestures." "Oh, come on, Hermione. Why can't you suggest something I can actually do?" Ron grumbled, his dreams dashed by reality. "Having trouble, Hermione?" Harry asked with a smile, his spirits lifted by the absence of Chamber of Secrets attacks and Lockhart's antics. "It's more difficult than ever, Harry. You can't imagine what Professor Blaine did to the levitation charm. Honestly, I even thought it was an extra assignment for Defense Against the Dark Arts." Hermione replied, her frustration evident. Harry and Ron exchanged glances. It was the first time they had heard Hermione express such clear dissatisfaction with any class's homework. It took me 4 full days to figure out that the canry in Conredi Leviosa is derived from ancient runes. Kurillad canry, Titan blade, placed in this spell, represents sharp and indestructible. But isn't ancient runes a course that only starts in the 3rd grade? Neville asked, puzzled. Atticus Blaine, who had been eavesdropping nearby, turned his head anxiously upon hearing the conversation. "Well said, Neville," he exclaimed. Hermione, arms crossed in frustration, couldn't tear her eyes away from the parchment spread out on the table. It was covered with a messily drawn spell model. And the pronunciation of M forms a ring structure in the spell model of the levitating charm, she explained. Its function is to limit the input of magical power, thereby weakening the spell's effect. That's why Professor Blaine removed it. "So does that mean we can use the royal curse?" Ron asked, his eyes lighting up as he pretended to understand the complex spell models on the paper. "It's not that simple, Ron," Hermione retorted, tapping the table with her wand. "I've just figured out Professor Blaine's reasoning for modifying this spell, but that doesn't mean I can use it. I don't have the ability to control magic power so precisely. The spell requires combining 2 parts by cleverly increasing the magic power input to create a powerful combined spell." Harry, Ron, and Neville exchanged glances, suddenly feeling inadequate in their 2 years of magical education. "Hermione," Harry said hesitantly, trying to comfort her, "it doesn't matter if you can't use it. You've always been the best in our year, and so far, no one else has figured out Professor Blaine's royal curse either." "It doesn't matter if it doesn't work. What are you talking about, Harry?" Hermione stared at him in surprise, as if he had suggested something as outrageous as being expelled from school. "This is our homework." "But," Neville interjected, rubbing his hands together nervously, "Professor Blaine said we could try to study this spell, and if anyone succeeds, he'll award them 20 points. "Oh, Neville." Hermione sighed, clearly upset. "We can't be lazy just because Professor Blaine's instructions have loopholes." "Don't mind her, Neville," one of the Weasley twins chimed in, walking over with his brother and their friend, the Quidditch commentator Lee Jordan. "Our Miss Perfection has grand dreams of becoming a saint." Hermione, visibly annoyed, gathered a large pile of reference books from the table, grabbed her research notes, and stormed off to the girls' dormitory without looking back. "You shouldn't have upset her," Ron said, shrugging innocently at his older brothers. "Now Harry and I have to finish our potions homework on our own." "Oh, sorry. Are you okay?" Hermione, rushing up the spiral staircase, accidentally knocked someone to the ground, causing her books to scatter. "No, it's fine," Ginny replied, clutching her bulging pockets tightly. She got up quickly, not bothering to see who had bumped into her, and hurried away with her head down, leaving Hermione standing alone. Watching Ginny's panicked retreat, Hermione frowned. In the dimly lit dormitory, Parvati and Lavender were sitting on the same bed, giggling over a signed photo of Professor Lockhart. They soon began debating who was more handsome, Professor Blaine or Professor Lockhart, and which second-year witches had received love letters. Hermione eavesdropped for a moment, feeling disinterested. The magic lamp at the head of her bed cast her thin silhouette on the opposite wall. As she gazed at the shadow, she recalled the Weasley brothers' joke and Ron's indifferent attitude. For some reason, she suddenly felt that the early spring nights were colder than those of the harshest winter. Hermione clutched her cup tightly, her beautiful brown eyes veiled with a thin mist of tears. "The strong are always alone," she murmured, gazing at the faint stars outside the window. These seemingly irrational words stirred emotions in the heart of the solitary young witch. Her daughter was suffering from yet another high fever, and it seemed never-ending. End of this chapter. Chapter 50, Professor Lockhart's Little Secret. Due to Professor Lockhart's stay in the school hospital under Madame Pomfrey's careful supervision, the Valentine's Day on February 14th was far less chaotic than described in the original book. Nevertheless, the school made a modest effort to celebrate. Early in the morning, the young wizards entering the Great Hall for breakfast were pleasantly surprised to find it adorned with light golden ribbons. The ceiling, a soft shade of blue, gently released colorful confetti. At the castle's entrance, little cupids with white wings cheerfully handed out bright red roses to everyone passing by. When Harry and Ron, feigning nonchalance, handed Hermione a rose, her previously gloomy demeanor brightened with a smile. On this day, no topic was more captivating than the innocent charm of young love. Hermione refrained from discussing studies, and even Wood, who crossed paths with Harry in the courtyard, avoided mentioning anything about Quidditch games or training plans. Most students above the third year ventured to Hogsmeade, while on the lawn designated for flying lessons, first and second year students enjoyed the day. Harry, Ron, and Hermione spent the morning basking in the gentle sunshine, playing wizard chess on the grass. After lunch, Harry and Ron decided to visit Hagrid, while Hermione, clutching a handmade greeting card, headed to the school hospital. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, as previously arranged, Hermione hurried to the third floor of the castle and knocked on a professor's office door. "Come in," came a weary voice from behind the door. Without hesitation, Hermione pushed it open and entered. Inside Professor Lockhart's office, the once decorated walls were now bare, with portraits and photos stacked in a corner. Atticus Blaine sat in Lockhart's chair, gazing out the window at the owls delivering letters. The floor was covered with what seemed like thousands of letters. "I never knew Professor Lockhart had so many fans," Atticus remarked, a pained expression on his face. "If I had known, I would have preferred helping Professor Snape with frog innards and slug mucus over agreeing to write reply letters for him." "But aren't you a fan of Professor Lockhart, Professor Blaine? You must be aware of his influence." Hermione's eyes were still a bit red from her visit to the school hospital, but seeing Professor Blaine's distressed look, she couldn't help but smile slightly. "Don't remind me, Miss Granger," Atticus exclaimed, waving his wand. The letters on the floor swirled into a white tornado before neatly stacking themselves. When the last letter found its place, a towering post reached the ceiling of the office. "I don't want to burden you, Miss Granger. Let's split the work evenly, and hopefully we'll finish by tomorrow's dinner," Atticus said, rubbing his red and swollen eyes after spending nearly the entire night in the library's restricted section. Thus began the arduous task. Atticus and Hermione sat on opposite sides of the desk, tackling the mountain of letters. Helping Lockhart with his correspondence was without a doubt one of the most tedious tasks Atticus had encountered in years. The letters were monotonous, filled with either nauseating flattery, requests for autographed photos, or reminders. In short, writing a response to each was a daunting task. Replying to Professor Lockhart's fan mail was an incredibly tedious task. Atticus Blaine could barely muster more than 10 words for each letter. Even so, after an hour, he found himself unable to continue. Across from him, Hermione had a completely different attitude. She seemed to consider it a rare honor to respond to Professor Lockhart's letters. She meticulously read each one and carefully crafted her replies. Time passed slowly, and 2 hours later, Hermione glanced at the pile of letters, which had only diminished by a third at most. She rubbed her sore wrist and looked over at Professor Blaine, noticing that he hadn't made any progress. He was leaning back in his soft chair, staring at the ceiling in a daze. "Professor Blaine, we promised Professor Lockhart we'd help," Hermione said, pursing her lips in a manner reminiscent of Professor McGonagall, her voice tinged with dissatisfaction. Under Hermione's urging, Atticus resumed dealing with the letters. This time, Miss Granger frequently glanced up to ensure he was diligently working, leaving Atticus with no opportunity to slack off. Atticus and Hermione had dinner in the office. Although he could have asked a house elf to bring the food to save time, Atticus decided to go to the Great Hall to fetch it himself, using the opportunity to take a break. "Professor Blaine," Hermione began as they ate. She no longer focused on the letters, instead leisurely chewing her steak. She stole glances at Blaine under the soft light, his lavender eyes seemingly holding unfathomable magic. For some reason, her heart skipped a beat. "About that line you mentioned to me in the library last week." Atticus responded, his attention still on his dinner. After swallowing, he looked at Hermione, whose cheeks were slightly flushed. "Have you realized something, Miss Granger?" Hermione hesitated, unsure how to articulate the faint feeling of loneliness in her heart. After a moment, under Atticus's gentle gaze, she nodded hesitantly. "The strong will always be lonely, Miss Granger," Atticus said calmly. "But life, in the end, is also lonely. Apart from ideals and beliefs, all the people and things we encounter on our journey can only accompany us for a while. Once you understand this, you have nothing to worry about." His words, intended to reassure, only deepened the young witch's unease. After dinner, Atticus fell into a state of complete disinterest. No matter how sternly Miss Granger glared at him, he remained slumped in his chair, his eyes wandering aimlessly. Professor Lockhart's desk was cluttered with his personal books from various publishers. Among the autobiographical volumes in the upper left corner lay a manuscript on memory magic that Atticus had accidentally discovered during a previous visit. It was a valuable piece of work, something Atticus would have kept close rather than leaving it scattered like Lockhart did. Despite his desire to study it, Atticus's sense of ethics prevented him from acting on the impulse. On the right side of the desk was another stack of thick manuscripts. When Atticus first entered the office, he had glanced at them. They appeared to be drafts of a new book by Professor Lockhart, titled Living with the Giants of Somerset. "Quite the heavy read," Atticus muttered, picking up the manuscript out of boredom. Unlike the ancient wizard research manuscripts, this one seemed less forbidden. The candlelight flickered, the cool evening breeze gently tapped against the glass, and the office remained quiet. The only sounds in the room were the rustling of a quill swiftly moving across parchment and the gentle turning of pages. After an indeterminate amount of time, Hermione, deeply engrossed in her work, suddenly felt a chill that made her frown. She looked up, scanning the room, and soon identified the source of her discomfort, Atticus Blaine, who was intently flipping through a manuscript, a sneer playing at the corner of his mouth. "Professor," Hermione hesitated before cautiously asking, "what are you looking at?" "Professor Lockhart's new book manuscript," Atticus replied, his tone laced with irony. "It details his process of discovering this story. I must say, it's quite fascinating." Hermione was puzzled. Wasn't Professor Lockhart's book supposed to recount his personal experiences? Why did Professor Blaine use the word excavation? And wasn't it improper to peruse Professor Lockhart's private manuscripts without permission? Before she could voice her concerns, Atticus tossed the manuscript onto the table with a decisive thud. His calm voice carried an undeniable authority as he said, "That's enough for today, Miss Granger. Go back and rest." As Hermione, still bewildered, closed the door behind her, Atticus's eyes flickered with sympathy. When the day came that Professor Lockhart's reputation was shattered, Miss Granger would likely feel ashamed for having once admired such a charlatan. Atticus stood and with a swift wave of his wand, opened the closed drawers beneath his desk and the suitcases lined against the wall. Stacks of hidden manuscripts flew toward him from all directions. In midair, the pages turned slowly, revealing to Atticus the untold, heinous, and unforgivable secrets they contained. Humph. After thoroughly examining the manuscripts, Atticus let out a cold snort. He glanced at the mirror frame on the tea table. The wizard within the frame was no longer smiling, but instead cowered in a corner, staring at Atticus in terror, his entire body trembling. "A bit of nerve, Professor Lockhart. You do impress me," Atticus murmured to himself, a chuckle escaping his lips as he stood alone in the office. End of this chapter. Chapter 51. The Notebook. Hermione couldn't fathom why Professor Blaine had such a peculiar expression upon seeing the manuscript of Professor Lockhart's unpublished book. Was it possible that the new book was underwhelming and had disappointed Professor Blaine? As Hermione entered the mansion's lounge through the portrait of the fat lady, the questions lingered on her face. It was late, and the vast lounge was deserted, save for Harry and Ron, who were curled up on a soft sofa near the fireplace, dozing off. Clearly, they had been waiting for her. How could life ever feel lonely with friends like these? As she approached them, Hermione pursed her lips slightly, a fleeting thought crossing her mind. "Why haven't you two gone to bed yet?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Her eyebrows arched with a hint of pride as she addressed them. "Why else? We were worried you'd get so caught up in that delightful task of yours that you'd forget about dinner." Harry and Ron, roused by her voice, rubbed their sleepy eyes. Ron grumbled in mild annoyance as he sat up. Hermione settled across from them, her gaze falling on the coffee table laden with food. A subtle smile played at the corners of her mouth. Though she wasn't hungry, her heart felt warm. It was then that she noticed a black notebook tucked beneath a few slices of toast. The worn cover suggested it was quite old. Ron, catching Hermione's gaze, shrugged and gestured for Harry to explain. Earlier today, Ron and I were heading back to the dormitory. When we passed the second floor, we heard Myrtle throwing a tantrum in the bathroom. Out of curiosity, we went in and found this notebook. It's owned by Tom Riddle, Harry emphasized, hoping Hermione would grasp the significance. Ron thought it might be dangerous and suggested we throw it away. Throw it away? Hermione's fatigue vanished, replaced by excitement. She picked up the notebook, examining it closely. What nonsense, Ron. There could be clues in here. Then he's clever enough to hide them, Ron retorted. Maybe he's too shy to show himself. I really don't know what you can do with it, Harry. I'd like to know why anyone would want to discard it, Harry mused. And how Riddle earned a special contribution award at Hogwarts. There are many possibilities, Harry, Ron replied nonchalantly. Maybe he got 30 owl certificates, saved a teacher from the giant squid's clutches, or even murdered Myrtle. That would certainly satisfy everyone. The trio knew that the Chamber of Secrets had been opened 50 years ago, resulting in a student's death, the expulsion of the culprit, and Riddle receiving the Special Contribution Award. It didn't take much imagination to connect the dots. Hermione spent a long time flipping through the notebook, but the blank pages yielded no secrets. Reluctantly, she set it aside. Perhaps we should give this to Professor Blaine or Headmaster Dumbledore. Wizards like them could surely uncover its secrets, she suggested, frowning. Surprisingly, Harry opposed the idea. Not many people are talking about this at school now, Hermione. I don't want to stir things up again. If, and I mean if, the heir resumes their activities, I'll let you give it to Professor Blaine. In truth, Harry couldn't even explain to himself why he hadn't discarded Riddle's diary. The reality was that in the days that followed, even though Atticus Blaine knew the diary was empty, he would often take it out when alone, hoping to discover something new. A new week had begun, and February had officially entered its second half. The hot topic at school was Professor Blaine, who had unexpectedly become the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Everywhere you went, you could hear the young wizards discussing the remarkable skills he demonstrated in the first and second year classes, as well as his teachings on the hierarchy of wizard strengths in the 5th, 6th, and 7th year classes. Some of the methods he taught for dealing with dark wizards and dangerous creatures were not widely discussed. In every house, students were confidently claiming that their relatives held the power of a court wizard, as if the magical world had reverted to ancient times when having 2 court wizards in the family was a status symbol. As for wizards of the saint level, none of the students dared to make such claims lightly. Dumbledore is a saint, without a doubt, declared Macmillan of Hufflepuff to Hannah Abbott, as if he had confirmed it with both Headmaster Dumbledore and Professor Blaine. And I suspect Professor Blaine is one too, Macmillan added convincingly. Think about it, Hannah. Since Professor Blaine arrived at Hogwarts as an investigator, the heir of Slytherin hasn't dared to make a move. I bet they don't have the confidence to face 2 saints at once. Macmillan's theory was quite popular among the students. Due to a change in the schedule, the 3rd and 4th year classes, taught by Professor Blaine in the 3rd week, began on Tuesday afternoon. The Weasley twins, Fred and George, approached him with mischievous grins. Professor Blaine, are you a saint? They asked. Atticus, standing on the high platform, looked at the Weasley twins with a half-smile, surprised at the opportunity for revenge that had come so soon. So, Mr. Weasleys, are you going to show us how to defeat a saint? He replied. A roar erupted in the auditorium, like waves crashing in a storm. In the Hufflepuff section, Cedric Diggory, a 4th year, jumped onto a table and shouted at the twins. Show everyone what you can do, Weasley. Go on, Fred, George, don't embarrass Gryffindor. Others chimed in from Gryffindor House. Angelina, Alicia, and Katie laughed, patting the twins on the shoulders. It's definitely revenge, Fred, they teased. As Fred and George nervously supported each other on stage, George whispered, Last time in Hogsmeade, Professor Blaine definitely recognized us. The duel ended much faster than anyone expected. As soon as they were on stage, before Professor Blaine could announce the start, the twins exchanged a glance and immediately split, running in opposite directions to surround Atticus. "Are you ready, Fred?" George shouted. "Ready to go, brother." Fred responded with determination. Atticus watched with amusement as the two troublemakers pulled out large bags of dung bombs from under their robes. Before they could act, he flicked his wand. Bang! 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 The sight of hundreds of dung bombs exploding simultaneously, along with the stench they emitted, was particularly memorable. Fred and George, drenched in the foul-smelling juice, fell to the ground, wailing as if under the Cruciatus curse. "Let's die together, Professor!" they cried dramatically. Unexpectedly, after a moment, the twins rose from the ground, glaring fiercely at Professor Blaine, ready to charge him once more. Indomitable courage. If Atticus Blaine had been intimidated by such a trick, he would have been a fool in the underground world all these years. Yet, he maintained a confident smile and casually flicked his wrist. From the tip of his staff emerged a glowing red orb, the size of a quaffle, crackling with red electricity. It soared above his head, trailing fiery tails. Boo, boo, boo! Before Fred and George could get within 10 feet, the orb above Professor Blaine's head burst into a dazzling display. Dozens of red beams shot out in all directions, striking the rapidly approaching Weasley brothers. Each of them was hit by at least 2 or 3 beams, causing their eyes to roll back as they collapsed unconscious to the ground. "Stunning curse, group fight version," Atticus remarked with a smile, surveying the stunned young wizards below. "Could someone kindly help carry them to the school hospital? P.S. Please consider voting and investing in various ways. Thank you." End of this chapter. Chapter 52. Hagrid's Eight-Eyed Spider. In the magical world, strength is the ultimate measure of respect. Since Professor Blaine effortlessly subdued Fred and George in class, his reputation has soared beyond that of Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape. Atticus Blaine has become the most feared wizard in the hearts of the young students. Just moments ago, when he appeared in the prefect's bathroom on the 6th floor, it was as if a ferocious dragon had stormed into the vast space. Prefects from each house huddled together in the corners of the bathtub, silent and tense. Throughout Atticus's entire bathing process, not a single sound was made. It wasn't until he left with a resigned sigh, having quickly attended to his hygiene, that the atmosphere in the bathroom began to relax. Why doesn't Professor Blaine use the bathroom designated for professors? Oliver Wood, his head covered in colorful bubbles, asked nervously, glancing at Percy, who had watched Atticus with awe from start to finish. In truth, Atticus was unaware of the existence of a special bath for professors. Professor McGonagall had not mentioned it when arranging his office and residence. He had only discovered this bathroom by chance during his time at the school. Around 8 o'clock in the evening, Atticus, now cleaned up and dressed in a fresh wizard robe, knocked on the door of Dumbledore's office. He entered under the headmaster's welcoming gaze. "I believe this is the first time you've come to my office of your own accord since returning to Hogwarts, isn't it, Atticus?" Dumbledore said, resting his hands under his chin and looking at Atticus with bright, relieved eyes. In Atticus's mind, he thought, if I have nothing to do, why would I keep wandering around you? He was a cautious person, and Dumbledore, being the only wizard at Hogwarts who could pose a threat to him, was someone he preferred to keep at a distance. "That's right, Headmaster Dumbledore," Atticus replied, forcing a smile. After exchanging pleasantries, he slowly revealed the purpose of his visit. "According to my planned teaching progress, I intend to have the students from 3 different grades face some magical creatures on their own after the start of March, based on their skill levels. What do you think?" "You are the Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor, Atticus, and you have every right to make such decisions," Dumbledore replied with an encouraging smile. Atticus cleared his throat, feeling slightly uneasy. "The issue is, what I plan to have them face. Well, I thought it best to discuss it with you first." 3 minutes later, after Atticus had laid out his plan, Dumbledore's previously relaxed demeanor shifted to one of concern. "It is indeed a bold and dangerous plan, Atticus. You must understand that the abilities of young wizards are limited. Are you sure this is a decision you've made after careful consideration? No great talent is nurtured in a comfortable cradle, Headmaster Dumbledore. I am aware of the limitations of the student's abilities, but precisely because of this, courage and determination in the face of danger are crucial. Since Professor McGonagall hopes to see genuine improvement in the students, I believe taking some risks is acceptable. For someone as experienced and wise as Dumbledore, there were few arguments he hadn't heard before. However, the challenges, Atticus Blaine's century-long life had shaped his cautious nature. Yet, in the end, Dumbledore displayed his resolve. I'll discuss this with Minerva. I'm confident she'll understand. However, Atticus, to ensure there are no mishaps, I suggest you have Severus accompany you during class. He is trustworthy. Atticus exhaled in relief, expressing gratitude to Headmaster Dumbledore for his support. Dumbledore, deep in thought, hesitated before adding, "Regarding the acromantulas you mentioned, I think it would be wise to inform Hagrid first." Atticus was momentarily taken aback, but quickly grasped the implication. "You mean Hagrid keeps those acromantulas in the forbidden forest?" he asked. Dumbledore nodded affirmatively. Atticus shook his head with a wry smile. "Hagrid has a particular fondness for large and dangerous magical creatures. I heard about them during my school days, but I never imagined he would consider even unfriendly creatures like acromantulas as pets. It's truly astonishing. Perhaps it is Hagrid's pure and untainted heart that endears him to those creatures who share the world with wizards," Dumbledore mused wisely, smiling at Atticus. "However, he has paid a significant price for it." An hour later, Atticus emerged from Dumbledore's office, his steps heavy, and paused before the stone gargoyle guarding the entrance. His expression was one of deep contemplation. Initially, he had only sought Dumbledore's guidance on the magical creatures for his class, but he had received far more valuable information than anticipated. Atticus was aware that Hagrid had been expelled from Hogwarts long ago, but he never expected the reason to be linked to an encounter with an acromantula on Christmas Eve during his 5th year. Even more surprising was the connection to the Chamber of Secrets and Voldemort. It was no wonder Hagrid had been so anxious when Atticus returned to Hogwarts as an investigator during the Christmas holidays, mistakenly believing the Ministry of Magic had sent him back. A moment of clarity struck Atticus. Although Dumbledore hadn't explicitly stated it, Atticus understood the implication. 50 years ago, it wasn't Hagrid who opened the Chamber of Secrets, it was Tom Riddle who had accused Hagrid. When Atticus inquired about Tom Riddle's origins, Dumbledore's response left him stunned, yet upon reflection, it seemed logical. The Dark Lord being a descendant of Slytherin made sense. Atticus even suspected that the connection between Voldemort and Salazar Slytherin might be more intimate than just a shared ideology, akin to the wild rumors suggesting a blood relation between Harry Potter and Slytherin. The likelihood of innately awakening the rare Parseltongue ability is minimal, suggesting it is a latent power in the bloodline. Slytherin could be Voldemort's ancestor, but could Potter and Voldemort also share a familial connection? Atticus pondered as he resumed walking. Dumbledore undoubtedly knew more, but for various reasons chose not to disclose it to Atticus. The more one knows, the deeper one sinks, and Atticus was content to let Dumbledore keep certain secrets, rather than being dragged into them. Regardless, I need to speak with Hagrid, Atticus thought, standing by the office window, gazing at the flickering lights on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. End of this chapter. Chapter 53. Urgent. On Monday afternoon and Friday morning, the first and second year students attended Defense Against the Dark Arts classes. In the auditorium, so silent that a pin drop could be heard, all the young wizards fixed their eyes on Hermione and Professor Blaine on the high platform. They watched with bated breath, not daring to make a sound. Neville even clasped his hands together in a gesture of prayer. Atticus Blaine flicked his wand, and a 10-foot-wide stone pillar, as thick as a bowl, rose from the ground, standing abruptly in the center of the platform. "So, Miss Granger," Atticus said, looking at Hermione with encouraging eyes, his smile warm and reassuring. "Please begin your demonstration." "Professor Blaine," Hermione's voice wavered, on the verge of tears. For the first time, she regretted raising her hand to answer the professor's question. She stammered, "I can't guarantee I'll succeed. You have the courage to stand on this stage and show yourself to everyone, Miss Granger. That alone is an unprecedented success." Atticus continued to smile encouragingly. After about 5 minutes, Hermione, who had been struggling to catch her breath, finally overcame her nerves. She raised her right hand, trembling, and pointed her wand at the sweat-drenched palm of her left hand. "Wingardium Leviosa!" she exclaimed. Her slightly immature voice echoed throughout the silent auditorium. As the white feather on her palm began to glow, a sharp clang resounded, causing all the young wizards to gasp in astonishment. The sound of collective intakes of breath filled the room. "Harry, did you hear that?" Ron exclaimed, staring at Hermione on the platform with incredulous eyes, as if seeing her for the first time. His eyes were wide with shock, and Harry's expression mirrored his disbelief. "No, Ron," Harry whispered. "Not once. It's unbelievable," Neville, standing behind them, said, his round eyes wide with excitement. "I could never do that." While most of the students looked at Hermione with shock and awe, the Slytherins were less impressed. Malfoy, his face dark with anger, muttered under his breath, "Just a lowly mudblood." But as soon as he saw Professor Blaine standing 30 feet away, he fell silent, too frightened to utter another word. His gray eyes, however, remained filled with malice and uncertainty. After silencing Malfoy, Atticus turned his attention back to Hermione, whose cheeks were flushed with a bright red. He nodded, his voice steady. "See if you can cut through the pillar, Miss Granger." Hermione nodded hesitantly, her arms trembling slightly, as if she were holding a metal rod weighing dozens of kilograms instead of a wand. With a sharp whistle, the feather, now with a metallic sheen, sliced through the air like an arrow released from a taut bowstring. In an instant, it struck the stone pillar. Snap! All eyes turned to the pillar. With a crisp crack, the smooth surface of the stone exploded, sending shards into the air before they rained down to the ground. As the dust settled, the young wizards peered intently at the pillar, their faces falling with disappointment. "Sorry, Professor Blaine, I failed," Hermione said, biting her lower lip tightly. Her brown eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and she looked utterly devastated, as if she had let down the world. Atticus Blaine had taken quite a few hits. He stepped forward to examine the situation carefully. Hermione's feather had been shattered into fine strands mixed with gravel, while the stone pillar he had transformed bore only a small dent on its surface, far from breaking. It was a distance of 108,000 miles from being a failure. "It's not a failure, Miss Granger," Atticus said, pointing to the small stone pit and smiling at Hermione. "To successfully cast a levitation charm, the key is strong magical power and control, both of which junior wizards often lack. I believe you've already grasped the essence of this spell. You just need to practice diligently. As you grow older, your magical power will increase, and one day you'll be able to cast a complete levitation charm." Hermione's incomplete levitation charm became the hottest topic on Friday. Everywhere she went, someone would stop her to ask about the secret of the spell. At lunchtime, even Percy squeezed in, ignoring Ron's displeasure, and asked her for advice in a slightly respectful tone. To be honest, it was the first time Hermione had experienced the feeling of being famous. "Don't get too proud, Hermione. You're still far from Professor Blaine's level." After dinner, as Hermione walked to the library, having just dealt with 2 Ravenclaw third-year seniors, she remained cautious, though she couldn't hide the smile at the corner of her mouth. As night fell, Atticus sat in his office, playing with a bottle of memory in his hand, occasionally glancing at the monitor on the opposite wall. Up to now, Atticus had spent a fortune to build this monitoring wall, but it had completely failed. He was almost certain that as long as he remained at Hogwarts, the heir would not dare to act. The only option left was to obtain clues from the protagonist group. The flame from the voodoo doll candlestick behind him had shrunk by half, and the crimson dragon blood had faded to pink. In about a month, it would completely lose its effect. Before that, Atticus needed to resign from his position as Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts, or he would have to face the curse of the Dark Lord. On his desk lay Lockhart's manuscript on ancient magic research on memory. Atticus had brought it over and had been studying it for several days. Strictly speaking, this behavior was akin to stealing. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't do this, but knowing what Lockhart had done, Atticus felt no guilt. It was just a case of one rogue outsmarting another, and it wasn't the first time he'd done it. Boom, boom, boom. The slightly urgent knock on the door interrupted Atticus's thoughts. After hiding everything in his office that wasn't suitable for others to see, he stood up and walked to the door. Professor Snape and Mr. Malfoy. Seeing Snape with a slightly complicated expression and Draco Malfoy half hidden behind him, Atticus raised his eyebrows. "Come in and talk, both of you." "No need." Snape's dark eyes flickered slightly as he looked at Atticus Blaine, who had caused quite a stir in the castle recently. From the time Atticus was a junior wizard, Snape had been certain that this unknown child would achieve remarkable things one day. However, he hadn't expected that day to come so soon. No matter how low-key an outstanding person is, they can't conceal the dazzling light they emit. Snape was almost certain that it wouldn't be long before the entire wizarding world would be astounded by this genius who had emerged from nowhere. It wasn't impossible that he might even surpass Albus Dumbledore one day. In the future, "This kid has something to discuss with you, but he's too afraid to approach you alone," Snape said. After suppressing the emotions flickering in his eyes, he grabbed Malfoy from behind and pushed him toward Atticus Blaine. Under Atticus's surprised gaze, Snape turned and walked away without another word. "I hope your future won't mirror mine, trapped in darkness and relying on the fading light of memories," Severus Snape thought as he strode away, silently wishing Atticus well. "Atticus, you should bask in the sunlight and let your own light shine freely." End of this chapter. Chapter 54. The Studious Malfoy. If I remember correctly, Mr. Malfoy, this is the first time since the Christmas holidays that we've met privately, isn't it? Atticus Blaine remarked, after Professor Snape had left the room. He ushered Malfoy into his office, observing the young wizard seated across the desk, appearing as if he were treading on thin ice. Atticus lowered his head, sipping the steaming bitter tea from his cup. Since returning to Hogwarts, he found himself drinking significantly more tea than before. Although he didn't particularly enjoy bitter drinks, tea had become his go-to choice. Humans are indeed complicated creatures, he mused, glancing up at Malfoy once more. "You remember correctly, Professor Blaine," Malfoy replied, his gaze fixed on his toes, fidgeting nervously on the stool. Atticus leaned back gracefully in his chair, rubbing the rim of his cup with his fingertips. He smiled at the sole heir of the wealthiest pureblood family in the British magical world, known for their staunch support of pureblood supremacy. His tone was light, almost irreverent. "So, Malfoy, what brings you to see me, even going so far as to enlist Professor Snape's help?" Having spent 7 years in Slytherin House, Atticus knew how to handle the descendants of pureblood families. Politeness was futile. Earning their respect required a firmer approach. Under the oppressive aura emanating from Atticus, Malfoy's usual arrogance and disdain vanished, much like Neville's demeanor in front of Professor Snape. He sat quietly, not daring to make a move. "Actually, it's about the immortal charm you demonstrated in Defense Against the Dark Arts, Professor Blaine. I wanted to ask you for the secret to mastering this spell. I've tried it privately, but I can't seem to find the knack," Malfoy admitted. Atticus blinked, surprised by Malfoy's response. He tapped the desk lightly, not speaking immediately, and watched Malfoy with interest until the young wizard seemed ready to flee from the tension in the room. Finally, Atticus smiled. "What is your true motivation for mastering this spell, Mr. Malfoy? Is it a genuine thirst for knowledge, or is it merely to prove that your talent rivals that of the mudblood you mentioned?" Malfoy's expression darkened. He couldn't deny that the latter was his true motivation, but he knew that admitting it would likely result in being unceremoniously ejected from the office. "Hey, it seems you've realized where the problem lies, Mr. Malfoy," Atticus said, standing up with a smile. He returned to his usual kind demeanor, as if the domineering wizard from moments ago was someone else entirely. He strolled to the center of the office, snapped his fingers, and a stone pillar from the Defense Against the Dark Arts class materialized on the floor. "Come here, Mr. Malfoy. Let me see your strength." For nearly 2 hours, Atticus guided Malfoy, meticulously correcting his casting gestures and teaching him how to coordinate his magic power while chanting the spell. Despite their efforts, Malfoy couldn't fully master the immortal charm that Atticus had effortlessly wielded since his first year. As Atticus had explained to Hermione in class, the spell required a level of magical power and control that junior wizards simply lacked. Not everyone possessed the innate magical prowess of Atticus Blaine. Atticus Blaine's abilities were far superior to those of his peers, thanks to the powerful spiritual energy resulting from the fusion of two souls. Malfoy seemed quite pleased with himself, unable to conceal the smug grin tugging at the corners of his mouth as he observed the gravel displaced by the feathers he controlled. "Thank you for your teaching, Professor." Malfoy, standing at the door, bowed deeply to express his sincere gratitude to Atticus. "Before you leave, I have a piece of advice for you," Atticus said, returning to his office and casting a meaningful glance at the door. "From beginning to end, there is only one opponent you must defeat, Mr. Malfoy, and that is your arrogance." The stretch of good weather finally broke on Saturday morning. The pleasant breeze that had danced across the expansive lawn for over half a month gave way to the biting chill reminiscent of a month prior. Hogwarts Castle loomed majestically in the drizzle, its silhouette visible from the snow-capped peaks in the distance. As Atticus passed the Quidditch pitch, he was surprised to see a few young wizards braving the wind and rain on their broomsticks. Judging by their uniforms, they appeared to be from Gryffindor. "Sk-sk." Atticus paused to watch for a moment, shaking his head in admiration. Poor Flint, only Merlin and God could help him win this year's final. Upon reaching the cabin in the Forbidden Forest, Atticus found Hagrid at the back of the house, softly humming as he bandaged an animal's injured hoof. The gentle expression on Hagrid's large furry face was unmistakable. "Hippogriffs aren't the most good-natured creatures, Hagrid," Atticus remarked. "Oh, it's all right. Once you get the hang of it, you'll find they're not so hard to handle," Hagrid replied, so absorbed in tending to the hippogriff's injury that he didn't notice who was speaking to him. "This little guy is about to reach adulthood. He got into a fierce fight with his companions over mating rights and ended up covered in wounds. I can't just ignore it, or the injuries will fester. Most magical creatures possess sharper intuition than wizards." Under Atticus's intrigued gaze, the young hippogriff, with a collar around its neck, lay restlessly on the ground. It seemed aware of the danger posed by the young man before it, and was eager to break free from Hagrid's hold. "Easy now, Buckbeak. I'm almost done. Could you hand me the scissors, please?" Hagrid's large fan-like hand gently pressed on Buckbeak's neck, keeping the hippogriff steady despite its struggles. "Thank you," Hagrid murmured, taking the scissors from a young hand. "You're welcome," Atticus replied with a polite smile. Dumbledore was right. Hagrid, who seemed to have giant blood, indeed possessed a unique brilliance. As soon as Hagrid released his grip, Buckbeak bolted like an arrow, disappearing into the Forbidden Forest without a backward glance. Hagrid beamed with joy at the sight of the spirited creature. "Oh, you seem to be in good spirits, you rascal. I hope this experience doesn't deter you from pursuing love." Cough, cough! Oh, Professor Blaine." Watching Buckbeak vanish into the forest, Hagrid finally turned around, his bright smile freezing momentarily upon seeing Atticus. After a few seconds, it transformed into an embarrassed yet polite grin. It's you, Professor Blaine. What brings you here?" "Thank you very much for the tickets you gave me," Atticus began. "I wanted to add more, but the recent illness has left me dizzy, and there's another bid to vote for right now. I'm truly sorry, everyone, but I can't make up for the lost time. Please bear with me." End of this chapter. Chapter 55. Aragog the Violent. To Hagrid, the Ministry of Magic's investigator was a source of fear, for they held the power to send him back to Azkaban. The school board's investigator was equally troublesome, as Atticus Blaine could expel him from Hogwarts on their behalf. Although Hagrid was confident that Headmaster Dumbledore would advocate for him, the situation remained a grave concern. Atticus and Hagrid trudged through the depths of the Forbidden Forest with difficulty. Despite it being daytime, the dense canopy above blocked most of the sunlight. Their wands glowed, casting a faint light around them. The forest was eerily silent, with only the snapping of branches and the patter of rain on leaves breaking the stillness. Hagrid, familiar with the terrain, leapt down from a slanted tree trunk, looked around, and, panting heavily, waved to Atticus. "This way, Professor Blaine." After another 10 minutes of arduous walking, they reached a long abandoned area. The ground was covered with a thick carpet of decaying leaves, and each step felt like sinking into a mud pit. "I think your efforts are wasted, Professor," Hagrid remarked, his massive weight causing him to sink deeper with each step. To avoid being swallowed by the leaves like quicksand, he clung to an overhead tree trunk as he moved forward. "I've asked it many times, Professor Blaine, but it refuses to tell. It only says that the monster in the castle is a terrifying ancient creature, a natural enemy of spiders. It won't reveal anything else. I doubt it will tell anyone." "Try it, Hagrid," Atticus replied. Unlike Hagrid, Atticus moved with grace, having cast a spell to lighten his body weight, allowing him to glide forward effortlessly. "I can't afford to overlook any clues." "Then be prepared, Professor Blaine," Hagrid warned. "Aragog is too old to move much, and its temper has grown increasingly irritable over the years. I can't guarantee I can calm its anger." "That's nothing to worry about, Hagrid," Atticus said, leaping over a small puddle and offering Hagrid a hand. "I can be quite short-tempered myself." As the trees thinned and the ground sloped downward, a shadow the size of a boulder loomed behind thorny bushes. Atticus knew they were nearing their destination. He stood at the edge of a crater-like depression, raising his glowing wand to illuminate the scene below. In the sparse forest pit, hundreds of spiders resided. These were not small, fluffy creatures. Each was as large as the 8-eyed spider Atticus had previously encountered. The moment Atticus appeared, the quiet pit erupted with a cacophony of rattling sounds, echoing through the silent jungle. "Who is it?" In the center of the depression, amidst misty hemispherical webs, a spider the size of an African elephant emerged slowly. Its body was black with streaks of gray, distinct from the other spiders. Each eye on its grotesque head was clouded with white, suggesting blindness. "Who interrupts my slumber? Is it Hagrid?" the massive spider inquired in a high-pitched voice, reminiscent of nails on a chalkboard. Click, click, click! The surrounding spiders responded in their unique language. "Oh, is that right? A stranger has come." Aragog's large mandibles moved swiftly, expressing its thoughts. "Children, what are you waiting for?" The spiders, unable to restrain themselves any longer, began to stir. Atticus Blaine narrowed his eyes, contemplating how much venom he could potentially acquire if he proceeded with his plan. "Oh, wait, Aragog, hold on." At that moment, Hagrid, looking as though he had just taken a mud bath, finally arrived, panting heavily. "It's me, Hagrid, Aragog." The old spider at the center of the web recognized the familiar voice, and its trembling claw paused momentarily. The previously piercing voice softened slightly. "Oh, apologies, Hagrid. I thought a stranger had intruded into my family's territory. Regarding what I mentioned last time, those centaurs are hunting my children. Have you negotiated with them? If they don't restrain their actions, Hagrid, I will have to retaliate." "Actually, Aragog, I've heard a completely different story from the centaurs. They believe, well, I'll need to ask you again, Aragog. I have another matter to discuss with you today." Hagrid, the de facto guardian of order in the Forbidden Forest, commanded respect from every intelligent magical creature, regardless of their feelings toward wizards. The smaller spiders scuttled around the large pit, their slender legs creating a restless rustling as they relayed information to Aragog, who was now blind. "Hagrid!" Aragog's voice, which had just calmed, turned furious once more. It directed its 8 blindfolded eyes toward Atticus and demanded angrily, "Did you bring someone else, Hagrid? You promised me you wouldn't." It seemed that communicating with this old spider was no simple task, Atticus mused, standing silently as he watched Hagrid engage with Aragog. "Professor Blaine is the investigator sent by the Hogwarts Board of Trustees to examine the school's investigation chamber. He insists on speaking with you directly, Aragog. I hope you can accommodate him." The chamber. Aragog's agitation flared before Hagrid could finish. Amidst its angry clicking, numerous spiders encircled Atticus and Hagrid, maintaining a cautious distance. The rustling grew more intense from a few dozen feet away, ready to charge at a moment's notice. "I've said it many times, Hagrid. We fear that monster. We will never mention the name of that ancient creature to outsiders. If too many wizards learn of it, they will covet its power and use it to destroy us." Atticus couldn't help but smile at the peculiar logic. He noticed Hagrid shrugging helplessly. "See, that's the result, Professor Blaine. You know that if it were willing to reveal the monster, perhaps I wouldn't have been expelled from Hogwarts." "Don't give up so easily, Hagrid," Atticus said, stepping forward with a relaxed demeanor. "Let me try to communicate with it." End of this chapter. Chapter 56. The Tempered Atticus. "Hello, Aragog. My name is Atticus Blaine," he began, his voice steady and calm. "As Hagrid mentioned, I am a professor at Hogwarts, and I also have—" Before Atticus could finish his introduction, Aragog interrupted him with a rough, booming voice. "Get out of my territory, stranger, and leave now. I won't tell you anything." The giant spider waved a massive claw threateningly, his voice low and menacing. "For the sake of you being Hagrid's friend, I'll give you a chance to leave." Nearby, a swarm of smaller spiders, tens of feet away, struggled to contain their bloodthirsty instincts. They gathered closer, their slender limbs restlessly churning the soil. Their emerald compound eyes blinked rapidly, and their ferocious mouthparts opened and closed as if rehearsing the act of devouring the thin human standing beside Hagrid. Atticus surveyed the restless spiders surrounding him, his expression no longer as cheerful as before. His eyelids flickered, betraying a hint of unease. "Go back, Professor Blaine," Hagrid urged, his eyes blinking with concern. "Aragog and his descendants don't take kindly to living humans. In all these decades, I've never brought anyone here." Atticus remained rooted to the spot. This was a rare opportunity to uncover the truth, and he was not about to give up so easily. In hindsight, he regretted asking Hagrid to accompany him. Perhaps if he had come alone, communication with these eight-eyed creatures might have been smoother. "I respect you, Hagrid," Aragog continued, circling within the hemispherical web at the crater's center. "My sons and daughters obey my orders and have never harmed you, but I can't stop them from savoring the fresh human meat you've brought. If your friend doesn't leave, I'm afraid he won't make it back to the castle." "Let's go, Professor Blaine," Hagrid pleaded, anxiety creeping into his voice. "You won't get any useful information from him." The situation seemed to be spiraling out of control. Yet Atticus remained calm, his gaze fixed on Aragog below, showing no intention of retreating. The smaller spiders crept ever closer, and Hagrid, unable to bear it any longer, rushed to Atticus's side, reaching out to pull him away. But just as his fingertips brushed the wizard's robe, a vortex began to swirl in Atticus's eyes. The raindrops falling from the gloomy sky transformed, each one halting in mid-air as if defying gravity. Dead leaves, disturbed by the commotion, bounced back into the air with a slow but determined grace, their paths traced by the fine raindrops they displaced. This incredible magical scene unfolded before Hagrid's eyes, momentarily making him forget his own immobility. A gentle breeze stirred, the sound of rain leaving its mark. Time seemed frozen, and space felt like amber on the verge of solidifying. All noise ceased. The spider's claws paused mid-motion, and only the slight trembling of their compound eyes, filled with extreme fear, indicated they were still alive. Atticus slowly brushed aside the fallen leaves in front of him, weaving through clusters of bushes and bypassing the blockade of smaller spiders. Step by step, he descended until he stood before the blind, ancient spider at the pit's bottom. "So," Atticus said, raising his arm and pressing his wand gently against Aragog's head. His eyes were stern, and his voice, though soft, carried a thunderous authority. "For the sake of being Hagrid's friend, I will give you a chance to tell the truth." The breeze blew once more, and Aragog regained control of his massive body, yet he remained silent. The sharp teeth in his mouthparts, worn down by age, rattled and clicked together, with Professor Lockhart's correspondence alone. Atticus Blaine's voice carried a hint of amusement as he addressed Hermione. The rain continued to fall gently, creating a rhythmic patter on the wooden eaves above them. Hermione, undeterred by the weather, nodded enthusiastically, her eyes bright with determination. "Of course, Professor Blaine. I'll make sure to bring me help," she replied, her voice filled with resolve. She glanced back at Ron and Harry, who were still huddled under the shelter, their expressions a mix of curiosity and reluctance. Atticus, meanwhile, couldn't help but reflect on the morning's events. The encounter with Aragog and the unexpected intervention of Dumbledore's Patronus had left him with much to ponder. The Silver Phoenix, with its gentle yet commanding presence, had reminded him of the delicate balance between power and compassion. As he walked away from the Quidditch pitch, Atticus felt the weight of his responsibilities as a professor and a protector of the students. He knew that his actions, even when driven by good intentions, could have unintended consequences. The rain seemed to wash away some of his earlier frustration, leaving him with a renewed sense of purpose. Reaching the castle, Atticus paused for a moment, taking in the sight of the towering spires and the warm glow of the windows. It was a place of learning, of growth, and of countless stories yet to be told. He was grateful to be a part of it, even if it meant navigating the occasional storm. With a deep breath, Atticus Blaine stepped inside, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that he was not alone in this journey. The year 2022 was challenging for many, yet we persevered. As we step into 2023, I wish everyone a fresh start and a joyful new year. P.S. The second round of recommendations is underway. Please remember to vote, collect, and invest. Thank you. End of this chapter. Chapter 57. A Little Help. Hermione hesitated. It wasn't that she was unwilling to share the glory, but without Professor Lockhart's permission, was it really appropriate to involve others in opening his private letters? Dealing with Professor Lockhart, a renowned figure in the European magic circle, was indeed challenging. Sorting through a week's worth of fan mail in just half a day with Professor Blaine was no small feat. As she pondered this, Hermione slowly turned her gaze towards Harry and Ron. Unsurprisingly, one was pretending to fix his glasses, while the other was suddenly engrossed in examining an old broomstick that had nearly lost all its branches. Neither returned Hermione's look. Observing this, the Gryffindor team stifled their laughter. Fred and George wore the most exaggerated expressions, but before they could crack a joke, a glance from Professor Blaine silenced them. The Weasley twins knew better than anyone that the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor was not a man to be trifled with. "If you really can't find anyone, forget it," Atticus Blaine said with an understanding smile to Hermione before walking away. "You two must come with me to Professor Lockhart's office tomorrow, or you'll never get to copy my homework again," Hermione declared. "Leave us out of it, Hermione. I never want to do that again in my life." "I'd rather clean the trophy room for Filch," Ron groaned. Atticus, who had already walked several feet away, could faintly hear Hermione's authoritative voice carried by the wind, along with the groans of the two young wizards. In the great hall, a few young wizards sat scattered across the four long tables. Over at the Slytherin table, Malfoy was proudly demonstrating his newly learned spells to Pansy and Daphne. Meanwhile, on the Hufflepuff side, Cedric, a fourth-year student, walked with a few friends towards the foyer. As he passed behind a third-year Ravenclaw girl, he discreetly slipped a note into her pocket. This was the third love letter he had sent this semester. Cho Chang seemed unaware, continuing to chat and laugh with Marietta, but based on Atticus's past dating experiences, the girl's gradually reddening cheeks suggested she was not far from being completely smitten. "Is this really necessary, Professor Blaine?" Professor McGonagall's demeanor had improved since the Christmas holidays. One reason was that since Atticus had joined the school, the successor of Salazar Slytherin had been quiet. Another was that Headmaster Dumbledore had been spending noticeably more time in her office this semester, which gave her a sense of security. Atticus, who had just taken his seat at the staff table, pursed his lips into a wry smile. When Professor McGonagall addressed him by his last name, it was clear she had strong opinions. "To be honest, Atticus, you're probably the most competent Defense Against the Dark Arts professor Hogwarts has had in the past decade. Your previous class, where you shared your experiences fighting evil and introduced intriguing concepts in transformation spells, was remarkable," she began. "Atticus's new spell is more than just interesting, Minerva," Professor Flitwick interjected enthusiastically, standing up from his chair. "It's a spell only a true genius could create." He looked at Atticus with earnest admiration. "After you step down from your position as Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Atticus, I believe you should teach a separate course on optimizing spell model structures at Hogwarts, incorporate it into the advanced class, and I bet the young wizards will be clamoring to enroll. To get into your class, Atticus. No problem, Professor Flitwick. When Dumbledore drives the crane west, I'll head back to Hogwarts to retire immediately. Atticus Blaine replied with a smile. He noticed Professor McGonagall seemed eager to continue their previous conversation, so he quickly turned his attention to Professor Trelawney, who sat at the far end of the table, adorned with large glasses and countless chains and beads around her neck. "What brings you down from the tower, Professor Trelawney?" he greeted. "Belch." Professor Trelawney, her hair in disarray, hiccuped and looked at Atticus in a daze. "The approaching darkness has blurred my third eye, Atticus. When did you return to school?" "The truth of the matter is," Professor Flitwick whispered into Atticus's ear, "Sybil's stash of sherry upstairs is finished." "Oh, keep your voice down, Professor Flitwick." Atticus's face tensed, showing a nervous expression. "I don't want to be predicted to encounter something bad again." Meanwhile, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who had returned to the castle due to the sudden wind and rain, were heading to the Great Hall to replenish their energy. They witnessed Professor Flitwick laughing so hard he fell off his stool at the staff table, while Professor McGonagall, with flushed cheeks and tightly pursed lips, tried to maintain her composure. Atticus stood in front of a professor they rarely saw, hands folded and face apologetic. "What do you think they were talking about just now?" Hermione asked thoughtfully as they entered the warm common room. "It doesn't matter, Hermione," Harry replied warily, having woken up early that morning. "I just want to go back to my warm bed and sleep until Monday afternoon after Professor Blaine's defense against the dark arts class." With that, Harry left Hermione and Ron, wandering off toward the dormitory. The rainy weather was indeed bothersome, but for those with the luxury of a leisurely nap, it was perfect. On that Saturday afternoon, Harry indulged in a rare, deep sleep. Ron had tried to wake him, but Harry merely muttered, shifted his position, and drifted back to sleep. By the time he rubbed his sleepy eyes and sat up, the clouds over the castle had completely cleared, and Hogwarts was bathed in bright moonlight. The dormitory was empty, and Harry guessed Ron and Seamus were likely playing wizard chess or gobstones in the common room. Hermione was probably either reading in the library or doing homework in the lounge. "Why didn't anyone wake me for dinner?" Harry grumbled softly as he dressed, though he knew Ron had likely tried but failed to rouse him. The air was tinged with a faint, stale smell of sweat, emanating from the football jersey Harry had left on the floor. He tossed it into the laundry basket, then slowly walked to the desk and opened the window to let in fresh air. The breeze from the Black Lake gradually sharpened Harry's focus. He sat down and stared at the half-written history of magic essay spread out on the table. In his mind, the battle between his conscience and laziness raged for 2 minutes. Ultimately, laziness triumphed, standing victorious over the fallen conscience. "Maybe Hermione can give me some good advice," Harry muttered, closing the parchment, folding it, and tucking it into his school bag. Under the dim light, a black notebook that had been in his bag for days seemed to exude a mysterious allure. Harry sat silently, staring at the notebook, and before he knew it, his hand reached for the pen once more. End of this chapter. Chapter 58. Harry wished he had never discovered the correct way to read the notebook in his bag. If he hadn't, he wouldn't be facing the headaches that lay ahead. Riddle may have the wrong person, he thought. Often, Hermione's expression mirrored that of Professor McGonagall as they shared the same Gryffindor spirit. For instance, Hermione's lips would purse just like Professor McGonagall's did in Transfiguration class, whenever Seamus caused another explosion or Neville injured himself again. "Perhaps it was another monster that caused the harm," she suggested. "How many monsters do you think this place can hold, Hermione?" Ron asked, sounding weary. Harry understood Hermione's desire to defend Hagrid, but even she seemed to struggle to believe the flimsy excuses she concocted. "I should have realized it might involve Hagrid," Harry said, staring into the crackling fireplace with a melancholy expression. "Remember, Ron, during the Christmas holidays, when Hagrid learned that Professor Blaine had returned to school as the Chamber of Secrets investigator, I sensed something was off, but I thought Hagrid just knew something about the Chamber of Secrets. The three of them fell into a heavy silence. After a long pause, Hermione asked the most challenging question. Do you think we can ask Hagrid about these things? It must be a pleasant visit, Ron said, pursing his lips. What should we ask, Hermione? Are we going to say to Hagrid, "Hello, Hagrid. Tell us, did you let some big, savage, hairy monster out of the castle last term?" Another oppressive silence followed, but this time Harry broke it. At noon today, Professor Blaine mentioned he visited Hagrid, but as far as I know, there's no strong friendship between them. But the fact is, Professor Blaine didn't arrest Hagrid, did he? Hermione frowned, analyzing the situation. Perhaps this proves Hagrid's innocence. And Harry, don't forget, it was Headmaster Dumbledore who kept Hagrid at Hogwarts. If Hagrid really... Dumbledore is a great and kind man, Hermione. We all know that. Ron interjected, feeling distressed by Hermione's weak insistence. No one thinks that 50 years ago, Hagrid murdered that unfortunate girl on purpose. But the problem is, sometimes he just doesn't understand the danger of those big, furry monsters. Their discussion reached no clear conclusion. Hermione suggested that since Professor Blaine might know about Hagrid's connection to the Chamber of Secrets case from 50 years ago, they should give the notebook to him. Perhaps he could confront the contents of the notebook. However, Harry strongly opposed this idea, and Hermione couldn't refute his reasoning. "I would never give the notebook to Professor Blaine, Hermione," Harry said, his expression filled with frustration. "Think about it. If Professor Blaine doesn't know about this at all, it's like sending Hagrid to the wizard prison Malfoy talked about with our own hands. Do you want me to spend the rest of my life confessing about it, Hermione?" Because last week's letter hadn't been completely resolved, when Atticus Blaine opened the dusty Professor Lockhart's office ahead of schedule at 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, the avalanche of papers nearly buried him. The entire office was a chaotic mess, with no clear space to stand. "I guess we'll have to find another place, everyone," Atticus said, crawling out from under the pile of papers. He looked helplessly at Hermione, who had suddenly become as reserved as when they first met, and at Harry and Ron, who stood behind her with obvious thoughts in their eyes. In the end, the beleaguered Atticus could only offer his own office. Both Hermione and Harry had been there before. Atticus Blaine's office was a place of intrigue, and for Ron, it was his first time stepping into the domain of the esteemed investigator. His curiosity was piqued by everything around him, but his attention was particularly drawn to the area obscured by a curtain, the live monitoring wall. "This is it," Ron whispered to Harry, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and curiosity. Before Harry could respond, Hermione silenced him with a stern look. Observing this, Atticus Blaine chuckled softly. With a wave of his wand, he drew back the curtain, revealing the magical wall to the trio. "Perhaps I should keep this hidden from others, but you three have clearly figured me out," he joked. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged embarrassed smiles. With Professor Blaine's permission, they took a closer look at what they called Hogwarts on the wall. While Harry and Ron were merely entertained by the spectacle, Hermione discerned something deeper. "Such a profound transformation spell," she murmured, a hint of defeat in her voice. "I doubt I'll ever be able to cast it." "Don't underestimate yourself, Miss Granger," Atticus reassured her. "You have a remarkable talent for magic. Maintain your humble approach to learning, and one day this will be within your grasp." To prevent any disruption to his work, Atticus closed the monitoring wall. As he turned back, he noticed Hermione's ears had turned a shade of red from his praise. Even with more hands, the task of helping Lockhart write letters to his fans was tedious and tiresome. Atticus used his wand to levitate sheets of paper, allowing a quill to scribble across them while he immersed himself in the manuscript. Harry and Ron watched, their teeth gritted in frustration, but they dared not mimic his actions. Time slipped by, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, signaling dinner time, Atticus excused himself to fetch their meal. When he returned, he found the stack of letters largely untouched. Hermione glared at Harry and Ron in disbelief, while Atticus merely smiled, understanding the situation. "Let's take a break, everyone. There's no rush," Professor Blaine said, his demeanor so approachable that one might forget he was a professor and investigator, more akin to a senior student at Hogwarts. This relaxed atmosphere emboldened Harry to voice a question that had been weighing on his mind. "Professor Blaine, did you visit Hagrid yesterday morning?" Harry asked, attempting to sound casual, as if it were a mere aside in conversation. Yet his clenched fists and the sudden, peculiar silence from Hermione and Ron revealed to Atticus that this was a question they had carefully prepared. End of this chapter. Chapter 59. Differences. A little personal matter. Atticus Blaine began, and as expected, the three young students in front of him immediately tensed up. Hermione frantically signaled to Harry with her eyes, while Ron stared uneasily at his toes. Harry, determined to uncover the truth, hesitated. What could these three possibly want to know from me? Atticus wondered, observing them with keen interest. "You three seem quite curious about my visit to Hagrid," he remarked. "That's right, Professor Blaine," Harry replied cautiously, trying to mask any suspicion in his voice. "Hagrid is our best friend, and you're an investigator." Harry trailed off, struggling to find the right words. Atticus nodded, understanding their concern. "You're worried that the Chamber of Secrets might be linked to Hagrid, and that I'm here to investigate him?" Harry's face turned pale, Ron's cheeks flushed red, and Hermione, after a brief silence, broke the awkwardness with a light-hearted tone. "Sorry, Professor Blaine. I've already assured them it's pure nonsense. Hagrid is Headmaster Dumbledore's most trusted gamekeeper. There's no way he could be involved with Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets, right?" Atticus lowered his gaze, smiling inwardly. "Miss Granger, if you think you can outwit me, you're still 30 years too early." He pondered for a moment, neither confirming nor denying her statement, and then addressed them with a gentle smile. "The truth is, pure theory and practice aren't enough to prepare you for the dangers that may arise unexpectedly. Therefore, in keeping with the tradition of the Defense Against the Dark Arts course, I believe it's essential for you to encounter some truly dangerous creatures." Seeing that Hermione, Harry, and Ron were listening intently, Atticus paused, shrugged, and continued. "The Forbidden Forest at Hogwarts is home to many fascinating magical creatures, and Hagrid knows the forest better than anyone else at the school, so I've asked him to be my guide." The three students exhaled in unison, visibly relieved by his explanation. Under Atticus's amused gaze, Harry shifted awkwardly, realizing that his back was drenched in sweat from the tension. "Is it okay to ask if you've prepared anything for us?" Ron inquired eagerly. "I know there are unicorns and centaurs in the forest, but Fred and George told me there are even more interesting things out there." Atticus leaned back in his chair, his voice taking on a mysterious tone. "That's classified information, Mr. Weasley. You must understand that responding to unknown dangers is crucial, and I don't intend to give you time to prepare in advance. Besides, don't bother asking Hagrid about it. I've already instructed him not to reveal a single word. Just wait for the surprise." Professor Blaine's words filled their eyes with excitement and curiosity. Even Hermione couldn't resist asking for a hint, but Atticus firmly declined. "I can only tell you that I've prepared 3 types of dark creatures, each with varying levels of danger, and each grade will face one of them. Beyond that, don't even try to pry." The discussion on this intriguing topic continued for over half an hour. Despite Harry and Ron's persistent questions, Atticus remained tight-lipped, smiling as they speculated. Eventually, even Hermione set aside her letters from Lockhart to join in the lively conversation. The pleasant anticipation of the unknown adventure ahead filled the room. The atmosphere of the conversation was so engaging that Ron momentarily forgot about Atticus Blaine's status as a professor. He looked at Atticus and murmured, "It's incredible, Professor, how a great wizard like you could have come from Slytherin." Noticing Hermione's cautionary glance, Ron quickly corrected himself. "I mean, we've never met a Slytherin as friendly as you, Professor. The Slytherins we've encountered always talk about pure blood, glory, and such, looking down on Muggleborns, but you never mention any of that. You seem more like a Gryffindor to me." Both Harry and Hermione nodded in agreement, clearly having pondered this question for some time. Atticus's straightforward response caught them off guard. "In fact, sometimes Slytherin and Gryffindor are very similar," he said, leaving the trio bewildered. The idea that Slytherin and Gryffindor could be similar was a novel concept. Traditionally, these two houses were seen as the most incompatible among the four at Hogwarts, a divide that had existed since the school's founding. Even the current Chamber of Secrets incident stemmed from this fundamental difference. Atticus noticed Harry's skepticism and smirked, clearing his throat. According to Headmaster Dumbledore, the most powerful and irresistible force in this world is love, because love can give people courage, and courage can give people the strength to face all misfortunes. This idea aligns well with Godric Gryffindor's philosophy. "Isn't that right, Professor Blaine?" Harry asked, his interest piqued at the mention of Dumbledore. Hermione, too, was anxious, fearing that Professor Blaine might express views on blood purity. "Many things in this world don't have a single answer, Potter," Atticus replied with a chuckle. "I can't say that Gryffindor or Dumbledore's ideas are flawed or wrong, but I have my own perspective." Before they could question him further, Atticus continued, "In my view, no amount of love or hate, however strong, can make an ordinary man lift a 500-pound stone without magic. Power is power. It's a simple concept. Neither love nor hate can grant you extraordinary abilities. However, these emotions can indeed fuel one's determination to pursue power." As the three students pondered his words, Atticus turned to gaze out the window. The starry sky, with its countless twinkling lights, stretched across the boundless darkness. For ages, this mysterious and unpredictable universe had been the dream of countless wizards and muggles alike. After a long pause, Atticus withdrew his gaze, smiled softly, and said, "If you must link strength and courage with love, I agree that strength can provide the courage to pursue love and freedom." Later, in the dormitory, Harry lay on his four-poster bed, reflecting on the loneliness and longing he sensed in Professor Blaine as he gazed at the stars. In a low voice, he asked, "What do you think, Ron?" "I don't know, Harry," Ron muttered, turning over. "But I think, compared to love, I seem to lack power." End of this chapter. Chapter 60. The three of Harry had already left, leaving Atticus Blaine alone in the office. The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Atticus silently watched the surveillance wall, observing the trio as they returned to the common room. Once they were safely inside, he turned his gaze away. The climate in early March had shifted from the bone-chilling cold, yet the fireplace's flames still roared fiercely, making the room uncomfortably hot and dry. Atticus moved to the window and pushed it open, his eyes drifting aimlessly over the landscape. For reasons he couldn't quite grasp, the quiet of the otherwise comfortable office felt stifling, almost maddening. The ancient castle stood silently on the high ground, and the nearby forest, which had witnessed countless legends that once shone brightly but had now faded into obscurity, loomed in the distance. Atticus stared at the rolling forest and pondered the concept of eternity, even recalling Voldemort's desperate attempts to achieve it by severing his soul with infinite magic. Eternal? Atticus chuckled to himself. The universe has been in perpetual motion since its inception, and life is but a fleeting moment in the vast river of time. How could anything in this immense universe truly compare to eternity? For both muggles and wizards, the only constant companion in a short life is loneliness. This was the truth Atticus had come to accept. Feeling disinterested, Atticus closed the window and turned away. However, as he lifted his foot, he paused, his brow furrowing. In the invisible magical realm, stored within the space, the magic that rippled like a sea of clouds was suddenly drawn by an inexplicable force, rushing into Atticus's body like a vortex forming beneath the surface of a calm lake. Atticus's handsome face contorted with slight pain, and the pupils in his lavender eyes transformed into rapidly spinning whirlpools, desperately absorbing the magic. "What are you planning, Dumbledore?" In the headmaster's office, Snape leaned on the desk, his dark eyes fixed on his interlocked fingers. Dumbledore, seated comfortably, tried to discern any clues from Snape's abyssal blue eyes. "Oh, that's interesting, Severus," Dumbledore replied calmly, meeting Snape's gaze with a smile. "You actually attempted to use legilimency on me, but forgive my immodesty. Even if I grow old enough to lose all my teeth and can no longer enjoy candy, you likely won't succeed." "Not only is Atticus puzzled, but I am also very curious about this, Dumbledore." Snape's cheeks twitched as he stepped back slightly, his eyes less confrontational, though his tone remained sullen. "Based on what I know of you, whether it's Atticus monitoring the students or his proposal for them to handle certain tasks in class, you would never agree. Yet you consented to both. Dumbledore, when did you become so tolerant? When Quirrell was at this school last year, you were more cautious of him than Atticus. Severus, do you wish to discuss the differences between Quirrell and Atticus with me? You're avoiding the issue, Dumbledore." Snape's hands clenched, veins bulging, and a flush appeared on his sallow cheeks. "The leniency you've shown Atticus is not your usual style. I can't think of any reason other than you're planning something." Fawkes, the Phoenix, was well acquainted with these frequent outbursts. He continued to sleep soundly, not even bothering to open his eyes. He spread his vibrant wings and tucked his head beneath them, letting out a soft cry before returning to his dreams. "Severus," Dumbledore began, his silver-white eyebrows and beard shifting slightly, his tone tinged with helplessness. He was about to explain something when something suddenly caught Atticus Blaine's attention, causing him to close his mouth. Under Snape's puzzled gaze, he quickly walked to the window. Through the intricately carved glass, he frowned slightly, staring into the boundless darkness. Silence enveloped the unique office, and for a while, no one spoke. "Amazing," Dumbledore finally murmured about 10 minutes later. His slightly furrowed eyebrows relaxed, and a brisk smile appeared in his blue eyes. In a voice only he could hear, he muttered, "Without a doubt, you are probably the most outstanding student at Hogwarts in the millennia since the time of the 4 great founders." The turbulent magic power settled, and Atticus Blaine breathed a long sigh of relief. When he came back to his senses, he realized that in just 10 minutes, both his inner wool shirt and outer wizard robe were completely drenched. "What is this?" Atticus chuckled incredulously. "Is this an epiphany?" For wizards, after the initial period of magical power surges in childhood, the magic within them grows steadily with age. Unless they take potions with severe side effects or undergo dangerous bodily transformations, ordinary magic supplement potions only slightly increase their magic power, which reverts to its original state once the potion's effects wear off. Perhaps because the wizarding heritage has been fragmented, or because no one has discovered the secret to artificially enhancing magical growth, every opportunity for a leap in magical power is rare and serendipitous. Could it be that I can't bear the loneliness anymore, and it's time to find myself a partner? Atticus mused, recalling his recent change in mood. Entering a rare phase of magical growth, he shook his head and laughed. "No, women only affect my casting speed," he said to himself after calming down. Suddenly, Atticus's eyelashes fluttered, and his perception sharpened. He sensed someone watching him from the shadows. He stared out the dark window, pinpointing the source of the sensation. After a long moment, his frozen gaze thawed. He retrieved a teapot from the shelf above the fireplace, poured a steaming cup of tea, and raised it in a distant salute to the unseen observer outside the window. "To the lone walker," Atticus murmured softly before drinking the hot tea in one gulp. "Did you notice that?" Hermione asked on Monday afternoon as the Defense Against the Dark Arts class for first and second years began. She squinted at Atticus, who moved more energetically than usual on the high platform, a suspicious glint in her eyes. She turned to Harry and Ron behind her. Professor Blaine's eyes seemed darker than they were last night. "I've never understood why Professor Blaine's eyes change color," Harry said, shrugging. His eyesight wasn't as sharp as Hermione's, even with his glasses. Ron nodded hesitantly. Maybe he didn't sleep well because he was up late replying to fans of That Big Liar, and he had a nightmare? Hermione shot Ron a stern look for his absurd guess. "Maybe next weekend we can ask him. Professor Blaine is very approachable. He might tell us." As the formal class was about to start, Hermione set aside the thought, cleared her mind, and focused on the eloquent Professor Blaine. End of this chapter.